Hello, what's going on out there, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me on the very first edition of the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast. The main man, Tommy, on the spot. And thank you so much for giving me a chance today. I really do appreciate everybody's time. We are going to be reviewing the King of the Ring 1998. This show just started about the 20th anniversary of this show was actually just a few days ago on June 28th, 1998. But I figured what better time to get everyone together and to gather around and watch along on the show, which we're going to be getting started in just a few minutes. What better time to do so than to do so right as the 4th of July kicks off. This is the 4th of July Eve, so hopefully you guys are joining us here on the live chat. If you're not, though, it's totally cool. This will be available on the YouTube channel right away, and then we're working on getting things together for the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast, wherever podcasts can be found, whether it be iTunes, whether it be Spotify. We're going to get on there, and we're going to get cracking. So the live chat is ongoing. I believe it's only available, and I don't know this for a fact, but I believe it's only available on the desktop version of it, on YouTube Watch, rather, as opposed to on the mobile version. But certainly, throw a chat in there, and hopefully you guys will be going. And if you can't participate in the chat, if you're listening to this at a later time and are trying to go through this, by all means, make sure that you download this, and as you're watching along, send some feedback. We are currently on Twitter, and when you look at this, our Twitter is very basic. Our Twitter has just started just hours ago. We've just launched it. It is Watch Wrestle Pod at twitter.com/@wrestle at Watch Wrestle Pod. Say that 10 times fast. Watch Wrestle Pod, and you can communicate with me on there. You can also communicate with me on Twitter at Tommy on the Spot. And this has been a long time coming. I've been planning this for quite some time. As you guys can see on the live chat, it went off, and I got married, which was a lot of fun just a few months ago. So with that, I knew that I'd be taking a little bit of a honeymoon. So we did the honeymoon. It was a solid 2-week honeymoon. And then I figured, why not get this going during the summer? And hopefully you guys will enjoy this. And I am of the belief, and totally okay with the fact that I'm sure for at least the first couple of weeks here, I may very well be chatting alone. But hopefully as this continues to pick up speed and a lot of folks chime in with us, then we'll be able to move forward and develop a little community here. Now, I will apologize if you guys are hearing behind me some blowing. I just got this fancy schmancy little air conditioner, went out, bought this brand new system, and kaput! It's gone. See ya. Goodbye. So I have to set up some fans here because otherwise it's about 100 degrees. But I will tune those out as time continues. So the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast, what is it? What is the introduction to it? Basically, with the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast, every single week, we're going to watch a classic wrestling show together in live time on a live stream. And we'll be able to check this out together as we watch the show. And while the show is going on, I'll give you guys a little bit of a perspective of what it was to be a fan at the time. I've been following wrestling my entire life. The stories throughout my family date back to me being just a couple of months old, my mother simply returning to work, and my father watching me at the time, rocking me in my little carriage while the WWE, WCW, NWA, what have you. My father watched 6 hours of wrestling all weekend long, and in doing so, rocked me back and forth. And at that moment, I think wrestling became ingrained in me, and it's been a passion of mine. Something I've been thoroughly. My poor wife goes to WrestleMania with me every year, and now I think I'm at about 30 live pay-per-views. So it's pretty crazy. What we're going to do with these and the perspective I'll be providing kind of as a fan, a lot of times it'll be as a fan who was there, either there live, either there from a fan's perspective, and also at the same time be able to be there from the perspective of a fan who has been somewhere around the show. Maybe I wasn't at the show live. Well, we'll get to this particular show. I wasn't there live, but I was at a sold-out house show that was held at Madison Square Garden just a few weeks prior. So I'll touch on that, and let's kick things off here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to actually start things off, and you'll notice a lot of times I'll be hearkening over to different material. If I look like I'm appearing off screen, it's because this particular screen to my right is where everything's going to be playing from. You'll hear the different show, and you'll hear the show kind of come in from here and different things to that extent. So we're going to actually turn our attention first off to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, just to provide some context of what we're getting into before we get into the King of the Ring 1998. So Dave Meltzer, and if you guys are not subscribers of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, I cannot recommend it enough. I've been a subscriber now for about 3 years. F4WOnline.com. They have tons of audio content up there every single week, and you get access to all the Wrestling Observer newsletters, all of the Figure 4 newsletters that Brian Alvarez used to do, and that's all there. Just tons of content. Can't recommend it enough. So Dave writes, Mick Foley has long since established himself as one of the greats in the professional wrestling industry, and over the last year probably solidified what doubts there would be as to him being remembered when his career is over as Hall of Fame caliber wrestling legend. But whatever he has done and whatever he will ever do within the pro wrestling business, he will always be remembered for June 28th, 1998, and the match that will never be forgotten against The Undertaker in the Hell in a Cell in Pittsburgh. And we're going to get into the Hell in a Cell. But we're actually going to watch this show. Again, it's going to be in live time here. And there's a lot about this show that going into it, I think WWE was at its absolute hottest peak. They had the very first blood match, which is the main event of this show, Stone Cold Steve Austin defending the title against the Monster Kane. And I'm actually going to pull up something here. And basically, what is pretty cool about this is that you'll basically, so not only was that, and the big stipulation going into it was Stone Cold Steve Austin defending his title, and at the same time, you had Kane going for the title with the stipulation that if Kane had basically lost the match, he was going to set himself on fire. So that was really the big selling point of the show. But believe it or not, and I always say this, one of the big things that was one of the selling points for the show, at least from a perspective of somebody who was watching the show, was the King of the Ring tournament and what seemed to be the collision course between Dan the Beast Severn and Ken Shamrock. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Tots, I don't understand how you can come on here, start your little wrestling podcast, and talk about how Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock and their meeting at King of the Ring 1988 was a bigger selling point than the Hell in a Cell. But it kind of was. I mean, yes, at the time, the Hell in a Cell, this was the second official Hell in a Cell match. They had some Hell in a Cell tag team match that was on Raw leading up to the show. And they also had a number of things involving the Hell in a Cell leading up to the pay-per-view. But this was the second match. But at the same time, it kind of felt like been there, done that with The Undertaker and with Mankind. They had, I believe they just said on the Pritchard Show, which I had listened to just a couple of days ago, because they did. And you don't know what the Pritchard Show is. Something to wrestle with, someone else to wrestle with. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Can't recommend it enough. Been a fan of theirs since day one. It's one of the reasons, actually, that I thought to do this podcast. A lot of times I'd be sitting there listening to the Pritchard Show and going, I would love nothing more than to chime in with a story about my time during that period as a fan. And so hopefully this will be the opportunity to do just that. So let's take a look here. And we are now going to get started on the King of the Ring 1988. Now, as the show goes on, this isn't going to be like a live commentary. I want to make that clear. I'm not going to be watching the show, giving you move for move. If you want that, JR and the King do a very good job on commentary during the King of the Ring 1998. They do a far better job than yours truly. And so if you want that, by all means, watch that show from start to finish. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a review, kind of a live stream review as the King of the Ring 1988 goes on. And I am going to shut off this fan here. And just in case it was providing too much excess noise there in the background. So I do apologize for that. All right. So basically, yes, I'm going to go ahead as the show goes on. You might not even necessarily hear too much about what's actually happening in the ring, as you will specific stories about what was going on during that period of time. And we'll take it from there. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm about to get started on the network. And you can watch this show along with every other WWE show on the WWE Network for only $9.99. Just crazy to think that it's still only $9.99. But we're going to get it going and we're going to start things off. So let's check it out. And we're going to get started. Now, I've already done the whole whatever that like little opening deal is with the TV-14. I've already started that off. And so we're going to go ahead. We're going to check this out. And for the next 2 hours and 36 minutes, we're about to dive in to all things King of the Ring, 1998. So let's take a look, and let's start the show off. We're going to get going right now. I have 3 zeros, 0, 0, 0. I've already gone through the TV 14 rating. I'm cool with that. Over the age of 14. If you got little kids at home, make sure you check that. They do have parental controls on that, and they won't be able to watch alone, which would be a bummer. But in any event, let's check out King of the Ring 1998. Let's get things going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So right now on my screen, guys, they've got the old WWF. And I'm not going to call it WWF too many times just because at this point I've been calling it WWE for such a long period of time. It's kind of ingrained in me on how to call it WWE. So these awesome WWE pay-per-view video packages I used to get started off with. And one of the big things about this show, and really the start of the build to this show, I think that when the show was first being built, Paul Bearer said something to the extent of, you guys are at the gates of the opening to the highway to hell. And it's very true. The highway to hell took over the summer of 1998. And as we continue to do these shows, we are going to continue down that highway to hell. So even though next week's show will have nothing to do with 1998 WWE and the Attitude Era even, we're going to come back to that in a couple of weeks when we check out Fully Loaded 1998 and then eventually SummerSlam 1998. So you'll see here The Undertaker and Mankind. So why would I say, that this match wasn't really something that I was really looking forward to? They had been on 6 pay-per-views prior to this, and matches on Raw too. And they had been kind of revisiting an old feud that kind of felt like it had been in the back burner a bit. These guys obviously had their big feud in 1996 with the Boiler Room Brawl, with Mankind joining up with Paul Bearer. And they had a number of wars, including the Executioner, if you remember him, Terry Bam Bam Gordy, God rest his soul. And they had a variety. Sorry about that. I had a computer glitch that just jumped on there, so I do apologize. We are still on the air. Good. That would have been a bummer if we had been kicked off, but we're good. Pyro. Talk about rest in peace. Pyro. To start off a show, and it looks just like complete craziness. Look how many, there's a bunch of signs everywhere, and it's just complete pandemonium. Nothing like being there for a live WWF show. But getting back to the Mankind and Undertaker feud, Undertaker in the weeks leading up to this event had made his presence known and his intentions felt that he wanted to go one-on-one with Stone Cold Steve Austin for the world title. That was what he wanted. He didn't really want this match with Foley. And then so leading up to it, he's kind of now ingrained in a feud with Vince McMahon because Vince McMahon does not give him this. Instead, he puts him in a #1 contender match with Kane on Raw, which Undertaker loses due to outside interference from the returning Mankind, who had just been fired earlier that night by Vince McMahon as Mick Foley because he was doing his corporate dude love type deal. But following his loss to Stone Cold at Over the Edge 1998, Mick Foley now was fired because he couldn't get the job done, couldn't win the title, and because he bashed Vince McMahon in the head with a steel chair. So Vince McMahon kicks Mick Foley out to start the show, sets up Undertaker. Undertaker, you want match against Stone Cold? Cool. You could have your title match provided you beat Kane in a #1 contender match. So they set that up, and lo and behold, Undertaker loses because Mick Foley interferes, comes back as Mankind, and now Undertaker hates. He has a feud going on with Vince McMahon. He has a feud going on with Kane. He has a feud going on with Paul Bearer. And now Mankind's back in this when he's kind of been viewed more of a kind of like a sympathetic character in a way. He was just fired. The crowd wanted to cheer. I feel like the crowd's always wanted to cheer Mick Foley because of the respect that they've had for him, and as we'll see throughout this show. But now they're kind of going back to Undertaker and Mick Foley. And so it was almost like a complete afterthought. I remember the thought in the house was like, amongst my family was, again, like how many times are we going to see Mankind and Undertaker? My father was the biggest Undertaker fan of all time, and I loved Mick Foley, but how many times were we going to see this match? So at the end of the day, going back to it a bit, felt like it was just too much. It's too much. So here we go, the Headbangers with Taka Michinoku and The Rock in the Real Men Wear Skirts. Now, this here, first off, I don't even think this match, there was literally no build to this unless it was on Shotgun or Superstars or any of the shows, but it was no build to this at all on Raw. The Kai and Tai had just came into the WWE. They had kind of gained some fame in ECW rather, and were now coming over to the WWE against Taka Michinoku because they thought that Taka had become a bit too Americanized in his time in the WWE, in his years now as a WWE superstar. So they came back kind of like for revenge on him. But these guys literally were not on Raw. It was not an announced match. Kind of feels like this match was just kind of thrown together. But I will say the Headbangers, despite being like an opening act, and guys who were usually in the opening contest, the curtain jerker, if you will, they were super over. A lot of people liked him. My best friend at the time had the Real Men Wear Skirts, and kind of Marilyn Manson was super popular at the time with all of his stuff and the gothic look and all the crazy music videos that he had done back in the day. Some really obscure and really kind of out there stuff. And in doing so, it really gained a major following. And so you're looking like late 90s. Here come the Headbangers. They're pledging allegiance almost to Marilyn Manson and kind of going off of the audience that he had created, which WWE was really, really good with. And I think almost better than WCW was at the time, because while WCW, yes, they were bringing in bigger stars, so to speak, like Dennis Rodman, Karl Malone, Jay Leno. But while they were going at Jay Leno, WWE is trying to tie little bits and pieces of what's popular in pop culture into their storylines. So here you see the Headbangers. They're kind of a little bit ingrained in that kind of gothic style. Meanwhile, oh damn, it's pretty good. But meanwhile, they also had things like Cartman, who eventually right now the Oddities are in the process of transitioning into the kind of the ICP Oddities that we all grew up loving. But at the time, they were not. They weren't growing up like that at all. So but eventually he starts carrying around Eric Cartman, and they eventually start moving into the cartoonish atmosphere. But South Park at the time was about as big as it could possibly be. So it would make sense for WWE to kind of capitalize on that as well, especially when they're now at their biggest time here in the late 90s. So I am going to take a pause for the cause here on the show itself. For some reason, I've lost this. So I'm on 6 minutes and 35 seconds. Not sure what is going on, but the show is frozen here. I don't know if it's a network issue or if it's a issue with my Wi-Fi, but we just reload. It's not a big problem. So we'll get that going there, and once we do reload, we'll just go right back to 6 minutes and 35 seconds. And in doing so, we'll just pick up where we left off. But what I was saying was WWE at the time, now they're really hitting pop culture, boom, in 1998. Stone Cold Steve Austin is about as hot as can possibly be. D-Generation X is getting there. And I know people are like, well, DX started in 1997. That's true. They did. But DX, as the group that we all know and love, started more in, with X-Pac, the New Age Outlaws, Triple H, all that stuff. Now they're really starting to peak, kind of as, for the first time, baby faces. And we'll talk more about DX when they come out, because I do have a good story about them, if we can get the show back up and running. So we will hang with me here. I'm going to go back into the WWE Network, and hopefully they cooperate with us, and we'll be able to get things going. Could have some coffee as well. Alrighty. All right, we're going back into the WWE Network, and we'll jump back into the Kai and Tai. But WWE was always, in my opinion, really big on getting things together when it came to randomly throwing things on the show. In this particular show, and we'll talk about this as we go through the card, because of the fact that this is like, oh, I see here what they've kicked us off of our Wi-Fi here. Okie doke. Not sure why they did that, but we'll jump back into the Wi-Fi, and then once we go back into the Wi-Fi, it will obviously be a lot easier to just jump right back into the show and pick up where we left off with the Headbangers, Taka Michinoku, going up against Kai and Tai. So in order to kill some time and give you guys a little backstory on Kai-En-Tai. So they come back into WWE. At the time, Kai-En-Tai had gained some popularity in Japan and brought that over into ECW. And they were kind of doing like a BWO gimmick. So you'll see that their colors eventually became, there we go. Their colors were actually white and blue. And even though, to start things off, they are not white and blue, later on down the road they would, but they never really talked about their allegiance to the BWO in WWE, but they did bring the colors with them, which I thought was pretty interesting. Also, Kaz Yazaki was an original member of the Kai-En-Tai group, but obviously he did not come over with the group, and the reason why was because he was a wrestler for WCW. So, yeah, so they kind of come over, they're going over, and they're coming in for some revenge here on Taka Michinoku. Okay, we're going to resume play, folks. I do apologize there. The Wi-Fi had assed out, and you can't depend on technology. But we're picking back up, and I am at, all right, I picked this up. We're actually a little ahead. I'm going to get to 8 minutes and 10 seconds, and then we'll count them down from there. So 8 minutes, 10 seconds. We'll pick it right back up where we left off. Middle of this match with Kai-En-Tai against the Headbangers and Taka Michinoku in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Now, conspicuous by his absence here is Big Texan Bradshaw. If you're wondering who's Big Texan Bradshaw, is that the same Bradshaw as Justin Hawk Bradshaw, JBL, APA Bradshaw? Yes, it is the exact same Bradshaw. And talk about someone who's really kind of reinvented himself throughout his entire time in the WWE. Starting out as Justin Hawk Bradshaw, a terrible gimmick. Transitioning into the New Blackjacks, a terrible gimmick. Literally having nothing to do with this guy. So they just have him as Big Texan Bradshaw. He has some loose affiliation with Taka Michinoku and eventually turns heel when Terry Funk decides to hang up the boots. But there's literally nothing going on with Bradshaw here until he finally gets his spot in the Acolytes and gets moving. And if you think about that, it's like 3 years and 3 failed gimmicks away from not doing anything during his time in the WWF, only to eventually get a chance to work in the WWF and to do quite well for himself and eventually become a champion. So it really, it begs the question. There's these guys who come in to the WWE and who get their start and then they just ass out. I always think of Colt Cabana, one of my favorite wrestlers in the entire world. Starts off as Scotty Goldman, and then eventually he doesn't. He basically just gets released. He doesn't really get much of a chance to get going, and it's a shame that they didn't have enough. They didn't have a little more patience with someone like a Scotty Goldman, because I feel like they could have done a lot more with Colt Cabana, even if it wasn't under the Scotty Goldman name. But back then, they do a lot. You would have things like you're going to see Too Much a little later on. We'll talk about them. Scott Taylor and Brian Christopher. These guys were doing nothing for years. I mean, they had, the idea basically behind them was that Jerry Lawler's son was Too Sexy Brian Christopher, and that was pretty much it. They did nothing with these guys until way later on. They got to a point where these guys were got one of the hottest acts in Too Cool, teaming up with Rikishi. If you're watching this match here, you'll notice that Taka and Kai-En-Tai are pretty awesome. The Headbangers, God bless them, despite the fact that I'm a big fan, in the ring, not so much. But Taka and Kai-En-Tai are incredible, and they won over the WWE brass, so to speak, with their match at Barely Legal 1997 in ECW, and with some of the matches that were going on there. And Taka Michinoku then came over to WWE, won their light heavyweight championship, and was having some good matches as their champion. And then, unfortunately, just in a few months, Taka will join over. Eventually, Funaki will also find it. Is Funaki already? I don't actually see Funaki in there. I think Funaki is still not a part of Kai-En-Tai. Eventually, he'll make his way over there as well. And they became more of like a comedy act. And, Choppy Choppy Your Pee-Pee is just a couple of months away. And it's a shame because these guys were unbelievable. Look at Taka go. I mean, not to mention, I think he's 23 at this time, which is crazy young. And but doing his thing, and I think he's still wrestling at least until very recently. So it's crazy to think these guys got their start in Michinoku Pro, went to ECW, and then eventually over to the WWE. JR is hyping up everything, and JR at this point is a hype machine. If you go watch the episodes of Raw leading up to this show, he does not stop. He is the entire show. He's boom, 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 boom. He's hyping up WWE's going to be here. WWE's going to be here. We were sold out here. Hey, don't forget, the big Titantron's coming to your town here. He is an absolute maniac because this is the Attitude Era. So there's so many things going on at the exact same time. He just flipped him off. I think that is Funaki, by the way. He just flipped him off. two middle fingers. Not even a remote care. It's a different sign of the times. I remember Randy Orton did one of those in his feud with Brock Lesnar a couple of years ago, and there was a couple middle fingers kind of off screen, and that was like a huge deal. Now it's like two random middle fingers in the middle of an opening contest that wasn't even announced prior. You'll see Yamaguchi-san there on the outside. He'd kind of become the star of Kaientai in its original foursome, I guess you can call him. And eventually, Taka comes over, and Taka and Funaki do their whole thing. They become kind of comedy acts, and unfortunately for them, Taka doesn't last. These other two, Mens Teo, they don't last too long in WWE. They're gone by the end of the year, and Kaientai just continues on as Taka and Funaki. And again, it's more comedy stuff with Funaki doing the Indeed. The Headbangers, too, they start to do some strange stuff. They were really big towards the end of 97. They won the titles in 97. They're still big here as kind of that, similar to maybe how No Way Jose is the guy. I'd kind of compare the Headbangers to No Way Jose. No Way Jose comes out, he gets the crowd really excited in the opening contest. He's not going to win too many matches, unfortunately, because I love Jose. I think he's great. I think he's super underrated in the ring. But his role is basically just to get the crowd amped and not much further from there. They try some different things here with the Headbangers following this. Eventually they'll split them up, and they'll have Mosh do the whole Beaver cleavage thing, and then eventually just do the Chaz, who's just there to have a great time. And eventually they'll reunite the Headbangers, and then they'll do that strange stuff. And at some point the Headbangers had the big snow cones and the big breasts, the fake breasts and everything. Taka and the Headbangers take this as you figure they would. It's a crowd. It's an opener here, and there they were. They're all excited. But yeah, so the Headbangers never really picked it back up after that short run. Even though I always thought they were a popular act. I think it was more a sign of the times that everybody on the card had some interest in them. When the Headbangers did, but unfortunately kind of flamed out. And for the next couple of years would kind of flounder. They'd try some single stuff with Mosh, and then they'd kind of get back together, but were never really the same from that initial run. It's a shame, too, because I thought that they could have done a little more with them, and I definitely think they had a spot on the card. But sometimes when you split teams up, it's never quite the same. One thing that I want to point out about they're talking, I'm telling you guys here, I do have some shandies ready to go, and I'm going to need one for the Too Much and Al Snow and Head stuff, and I'll explain the silliness going into that. But one thing that really annoys me about the here comes okay. But one thing that really annoys me about this show is there's a lot going on here other than the King of the Ring tournament and other than the Hell in a Cell and the title match. And there shouldn't have been too much more going on than that. The idea of the King of the Ring for me was always the idea that you're going in and you're going to see guys wrestle 3 times in one night. The ultimate show of attrition. You have to make it through 3 times in one night. And usually a heel would get through by, he'd get to advance due to somebody else in another bracket either having a double disqualification, double count out, time expires, what have you. So it's fine if they advance, but I love the 8 men in the King of the Ring and the tournament being the quarterfinals on the actual pay-per-view itself. They did away with it only after 1995. So this is the third year that they did without it. They'd bring it back in 1999, I believe. I think they did bring it back in 99, but I always felt the King of the Ring should be this guy. Look at him, crotch chops galore. I Sable now. Not much. Literally looks at the camera, doesn't know what else to do, so he just starts crotch chopping. So, in case you're wondering, why is Sable here with Vince McMahon? This makes no sense. At the time, and they talked about this a bit on the Pritchard show when they talked about this show, the WWE was not following through on any of the stipulations they'd lay out. So just the month prior, they had built up a huge match in which Sable would be choosing her opponent, choosing somebody to represent her to go against Marvelous Mark Merrow, and if that opponent would beat Marvelous Mark Merrow, Sable would get her freedom, would no longer need to be associated with Mark Merrow, and she'd be good to go. So Sable loses, no longer with Mark Merrow. And Sable is gone because Sable chooses herself to face Mark Merrow. We'll get one of these shandies ready. You guys are not offended by that. I apologize. It's a little after 10 here. It's a little late night podcast session. If you're listening to this podcast, by the way, then you won't necessarily know that I have an orange shandy unless I were to tell you, which I'm going to do. Of course, it's funny here. A great little moment there. Sable's getting out of the ring. Pat Patterson gives her a little smack there on the tuchus, and of course JR has to mention Pat goes ahead and smacks the derriere of Sable, territory he's not all that familiar with, and it's a great little dig at Pat there by JR. Because, of course, Pat is openly gay, and obviously nothing wrong with that. And in 1998 was openly gay. But despite all of that, really finally was able to at least fully come clean out to everybody back in when he was on the Legends House show. So that was pretty cool. But a funny moment, he smacks Sable on the ass. Sable turns around, slaps the living taste out of his mouth. And there you go. So, yeah, so Sable's out of the WWE for, literally 2 weeks. She shows back up on TV because she's one of the hottest things in the company, so clearly she wasn't going to be gone forever. But in showing back up, she's now under the tutelage and the guise of being with Mr. McMahon. She's there with Vince McMahon. And in terms of Vince McMahon, he was doing the slow burn transition into the Mr. McMahon character. Now he is in full peak douchebag, super heel, Vince McMahon edition, and he's a total heel here. So he's the most hated man in the company. A big shot of the crowd, half the dudes with the double birds up, just insanity. So they're building up, and it's funny because I remember at the time, one of the big things about this show, obviously, is the stipulation that if Kane loses, he will set himself on fire. And we were like, oh my God, we got to tune in. Is Kane really going to set himself on fire? Because no way is Kane going to be losing a match. He's going to be winning the title. I mean, he just came to the WWE, and this didn't happen too much back then. Like now, you had Brock Lesnar show up in April. He won the title by August. You didn't really have people show up and just boom into the title picture, win the title. So you had to hear Kane isn't even in the company for a full year yet. He just debuts at Bad Blood 1997, which was October the 5th, the day before my birthday, in 1997. And here it is, June 28th, 1998. He's in the main event. Nobody thinks he's winning the title. So it's kind of like, well, damn, are they really going to set this dude on fire? Or what are they going to do to get out of it? And they're promoting that as the stipulation. Either Kane wins the belt or he sets himself on fire. So you know you're either getting a title change or you're getting a man set on fire. That is the selling point of this pay-per-view. And Vince is in full bravado here. the Stooges would be completely out of control here in the next coming years. Now they're really kind of establishing. And Slaughter is still the commissioner of WWF at the time. And his main focus was trying to make sure that members of DX and the Nation didn't interfere in the members of DX and the Nation's matches. So, and when they'd have singles matches, but he's kind of like a stooge in training somewhat. He's like a stooge when he wants to be. So you see him from time to time with the Stooges, but he's not with them here. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Even though this was the stipulation building into the match, I should point out they did not announce this stipulation between Stone Cold and Kane until, man, I want to say I think it was the Raw right beforehand. They definitely didn't announce that Kane wanted to set himself on fire until the go-home Raw before the pay-per-view. And they did announce that it was going to be a First Blood match, which they ended the show with Stone Cold standing in the ring and blood falling down all over him as a way to kind of still, kind of build up the match. Also at the time, Kane has Paul Bearer by his side. You'll see him a little bit later. Paul was just destroyed on WWE TV leading up to this match. They had the Hell in a Cell match where it was Vince McMahon kicks Pat Patterson because Pat's holding the rope, then turns over and kind of scoffs at him because he was too close to where Vince was getting out. It's too funny. And they're doing the replay of Pat smacking Sable on the ass, and it cannot get enough of the fact that Pat is the one doing this. And we'll get into some news about Pat as the show goes on. It's crazy to think he's here and would go through some crazy stuff in his personal life during this show, which I just found out by listening to the Pritchard show. It's crazy stuff. But Sable did. She whacked the hell out of him. Oh, now it's the King of the Ring tournament. We'd forgotten all about that. The entire reason for the show. See, you have a Final Four here, and they had been building this up really as it's going to end up being Shamrock and Severn. If you're wondering, Severn, I've heard that name recently. Well, he did just fight Matt Riddle. It's the same Dan Severn. So in any event, they were really building up that this was going to be the big collision course. They started with the second the qualifying matches started. They had been building that, hey, maybe Ken Shamrock was going to be facing off against Severn. Both of them kind of had issues with the Nation and with different people, so they were always going at one another. And in doing so, they were building that if they were going to have their match, it would have to be in the finals. So that just seemed like the logical direction they're going. And I know it doesn't sound like much on paper, but Ken Shamrock was, man, I'm telling you right now, go back and watch the Raw 3 weeks prior to that. It was, I'll pull up the date here on the calendar. So check in here. Alrighty, here we go. Yes. So 3 weeks prior to this show, on the June 28th, so I guess it was the June... The June 1st edition of Raw. Go back and check out that edition of Raw. Ken Shamrock returns from injury, and the pop this man gets, I mean, it's people are into this dude. They are super stoked about him. So yeah, it might seem like Ken Shamrock being, this tournament is really about Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn, and that might sound crazy, but people love Ken Shamrock here. People were really, really into him. And what's not to love? I mean, he's a badass UFC fighter. One of the things that's really interesting about Ken is that obviously he came from the UFC. Dan Severn also came from the UFC, which was something I personally loved. Now, Dan Severn gets the award for, I'm telling you right now, most boring wrestler arguably in the history of WWE. I know Dan's a good dude. I've heard him interviewed a couple of different times. He seems like a genuinely great guy. Damn, was he just... I was the most boring... Not only was he the most boring wrestler in the King of the Ring tournament, I mean, in terms of being a WWE superstar, but I remember his figure was incredibly boring. His figure was like... It looked almost like they just took Stone Cold's figure and plopped Dan Severn's head on there, and that was it. It was just terrible. But what was cool about it for me was like the idea that Dan Severn, he's in UFC, and he's not. He was actually wrestling at the time, but the idea that he would go ahead and be in the UFC and see all the success that Ken Shamrock has going on. And at the same time, now he's coming over almost from UFC to get at Ken Shamrock and get a little bit of revenge. To me, that's crazy. And that's really cool. Like, can you imagine, for example, obviously Ronda Rousey now. Let's just use Ronda for an example. Let's say Ronda is in WWE. She's becoming a big star. Let's say Besh Correa, or Holly Holm. Let's use Holly Holm, the lady who beat and is the first one to knock out Ronda Rousey, comes now and she joins WWE. To me, there's been a lot of interest in there. And I can imagine for old school MMA UFC fans at the time, when UFC was like super barbaric and just trying to figure out any which way to get its name out there, they were not the same type of stuff you see from now. I mean, you'd literally be able to watch MMA tournaments. Excuse me. I remember when I turned 10, so this is like 96, I want to say, we ordered a MMA tournament. Could you imagine that? 4 fights, mixed martial arts in one night. You cannot even comprehend how that was allowed to happen. But pretty cool to see that these guys were now coming over from UFC, and eventually, now Dan's coming over to WWE for like almost a bit of revenge, or maybe to get his spotlight out there. What was cool though was they had like a little bit of respect for one another, so it wasn't like they jumped right into a feud. It was like they had respect, but Dan was letting Ken know that like it was going to be on at some point. Fortunately, it never did get there. Not to give a spoiler of the 20-year show, but it never did. It never did get there. But what was cool was whenever they'd promote Dan Severn, when he was coming to UFC, they would show legitimate fights, UFC footage on WWE Raw of Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn doing their thing, getting things going, and it was really cool. Say right now, Jeff Jarrett, if you're wondering what's going on with him, this is still gold flowing locks Jeff Jarrett. He's still doing like his entertainer gimmick, but it's on the way out. To his credit, reinvents himself. We're 2 months away from Jeff getting his head shaved at the King of the Ring 1998. Again, 20-year spoiler, sorry. But in doing so, Jeff here actually is doing his deal where Tennessee Lee is his manager. And God bless Tennessee Lee, who used to be in WCW. Total go-away heat with me. I hated him then. I hate hearing him now. Hate that old Jeff Jarrett music. It's just so mid-90s and like, I was not working in the Attitude Era. So it's good, again, to Jeff's credit, change things up, don't piss me off, and away we go. But we're still 2 months away from that. And what's interesting about Jeff at this time is he has Southern Justice with him. If you're not sure who Southern Justice was the Godwins, the repackaged Godwins. That's right, the Country Farmers. They were now mean, old big business. And I actually thought, considering how bad the tag division is, and we're about to see on this show how absolutely terrible the tag team division was for WWF, WWE, whatever, back in 1998. It was, in my opinion, and I know that back in 1998, the Outlaws were about as hot as can possibly be. So because they were that hot, it's almost like you forget how bad the tag team division was. In my opinion, it might have been the worst it ever was in WWE. We're a year or so away from Edge and Christian, the Hardys and the Dudleys. Tag division is just horrible. So with the tag division being that bad, seeing the Godwins showing up in suits, slick back hair, shades on, looking just like badasses, I thought was really cool, and it never really went anywhere. I think Henry Godwin never really recovered fully from his injuries that I think, if memory serves correct, were caused due to like an errant doomsday device by the LOD. LOD was still around, but again, we'll talk about the tag teams when we get to the tag title match. Ken absolutely just did a Hurricane Rana on Jeff Jarrett, and Jeff falls on his head, legit hurt, taps out immediately to the ankle lock, probably because of the fact that he is like, damn, you just dropped me on my damn head. I'm tapping out real quick. Tennessee Lee gets put in his place for measure. Don't remember Tennessee Lee being around too much longer after this. He's Colonel Rob Barker, by the way, from WCW. Hated him then, too. Not even a huge WCW fan. Hated Colonel Rob Barker, too. They're even JR here is building up Dan to be Severn. Oh, he might face Dan to be Severn, or will it be The Rock? It's like Rock almost ends up being an afterthought, and yet Rock got the win. I think the problem with Ken, and why I think he never fully got over as a top babyface, as you look at him looking completely demonic and wide bug-eyed and looking like he's ready to just destroy everything in sight. That way of acting and being so intense, I think, really kind of stopped him from being able to do his thing. Oh, I love stuff like this. Love stuff like this when they go ahead and they show some. Look at that, the big right outside of the igloo there in Pittsburgh. You got the big inflatable Undertaker. Looks like there was probably something there that they cut out of the network. But if there's one thing I thoroughly enjoy, it's seeing video packages where something a little outside the ring. They actually showed one that from the Times. If you go back and watch some of those old Raws, they had a deal where Stone Cold Steve Austin appeared on the Man Cow show, which was a big Chicago radio show, might still exist. And him being on that show, and Vince McMahon actually showed up, called into the show. It was pretty funny. So here's The Rock, and he's still a little bit away. You'll see here, look, they're getting rid of Kama, they're getting rid of Mark Henry. Rock is still about, it's crazy to think that this guy here, especially if you watch him in these matches, he's going to be champ in 2 months. Not 2 months, 4 months. Doesn't even seem, in my opinion, close to this. But what was great about WWE at the time is you had Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was your tippy-top guy, right? Right there with him, you had Undertaker, maybe right underneath him. And then right along with them, you had Mick Foley, whether it be Dude Love, Cactus Jack, or not so much Cactus yet. Cactus came later on. More Dude Love, Mankind. They were right there with them. You had super uber heel Vince McMahon. And you had the really exciting... Got a little distracted by Dan Severn making his way to the ring in an incredibly sweaty... I don't know if Dan's been hanging out with me here in the non-AC room here in the middle of 100-degree weather, New York. Here comes Dan. My Lord. Look at this man here. Comes through here. He's wearing a gray T-shirt. I get they're trying to establish no nonsense, but, Lord. God, now he'd probably be an elite figure with a gray T-shirt accessory that comes both dry and sweaty. But yeah, so you had all those guys at the top of the card. You had a super hot Kane who was like this. He was just running through everyone. He was so badass at the time. He's right there with those guys. And then one notch below, you had The Rock and you had Triple H as like your clear cut. These are the future guys, but they were kind of holding up the mid card and bringing everybody up with them. Rock had, obviously, the Nation. So you had Godfather, Mark Henry, D'Lo, Owen Hart. And Farouk was there. Farouk had, left. And you had DX, which was obviously Triple H, X-Pac, the Outlaws, and China. And just being associated with those two guys really brought brought everything up. So The Rock and Dan Severn here trying some catch-as-catch-can, shoot wrestling, so to speak. JR is doing what JR. What I first remember about JR was he was the first guy who would show up and provide background about each and every wrestler. Kind of like humanized a lot of the superstars, where he would talk about, he's talking about Rock right now being from the University of Miami, playing football. I thought it was pretty cool. So yeah, so winner of this already. Well, we're 3 matches into this show here. Just the second King of the Ring match, and we're going to determine the finals. It's kind of like, who cares? Such an afterthought. And it's a shame because you look back at those first couple King of the Rings. You had Bret Hart running through everybody, the Bret Hart show. The second was the Owen Hart show. The third one was obviously, the Mabel, the whole thing with Mabel. We won't go get into that one because it destroys my point. But as a kid, I loved seeing Savio Vega wrestle 4 times in one night. He was my favorite wrestler, and seeing him doing his thing was great. And then it's just it was done from there. I don't quite know why they did away with the idea of that. I understand it's to get more people on the show, but at the same time, it kind of really took away from it for me. What's also different about Severn here, not to throw shade at Danny, because I've been kind of giving a beating on him. Ken Shamrock is jacked to the gills, looks completely ripped to shreds. Severn looks just so nothing. He doesn't even look in great shape. He just looked like this middle-aged man who showed up, and he had the mustache, looked a little bit like Tom Selleck, and that's that. Not sure what Rock is doing there. Because he was making fun of Severn. The crowd doesn't even look like they care too much because they have really no emotional connection in Severn. But he was originally brought in, by the way, Severn. He was brought in WWE under the horrible new NWA faction that was brought in beginning of '98. Jim Cornette brought up the new Midnight Express, who we'll be able to see a little bit later on. Been saving some stories for that match, by the way, because I know that one's a doozy. And I believe Jeff Jarrett was also involved with that as well. And Severn was the NWA champion. Thankfully, that was quickly dropped because it was terrible. I still don't know what they were trying to do. And it's really weird. But at the same time, how cool would it be now if randomly they had even some guys from NXT show up? Maybe they had a faction show up. I thought it would be cool if they had a faction show up with Almas and the Undisputed Era and have all those guys with all the belts show up on Raw, and they're doing their thing. That would have been super cool. So despite the fact that the Nation guys were just kicked out of ringside, they are right back here. Oh, D'Lo. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that might be the debut of the famous D'Lo Brown chest protector. Wow, we might have seen history right there. I'm pretty sure that is the D'Lo Brown chest protector, and that's the first appearance we've seen of it in the King of the Ring 1998. The first appearance ever in WWE, which he'd keep around for months and months and months. And there you go. Middle fingers galore from the crowd, and it's The Rock versus Ken Shamrock. And I know a lot of the retrospective that people have is, damn, if only The Rock had won. He would have joined. It would have been Bret, Owen, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H. Then it would have been The Rock, and then Billingham, and then you would have also had Angle, Edge, and Lesnar. What a crew of King of the Ring winners. But I don't hate so much on Ken Shamrock. He did his thing, man. He was super over at the time, too. Rock is really starting to come into his own as a promo here. Not really quite up to the level we'd all come to know and love. I feel like he really hit that stride when he was in the corporation as the corporate champ. But damn, there's D'Lo, man. My man, D'Lo Brown. Love him. With the picture-perfect frog splash, and then stumbles and basically crouches himself on the barricade. Not a smooth leaving, but pretty cool. But at the time, I remember being super bummed. And so on the Pritchard show, and please do go and listen to that. I know I'm referencing the Bruce Pritchard show. I can't reference it enough. And all things being told, all told, my plan was to actually debut this podcast that you're watching and listening to right now on YouTube Live, the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast. You'd be able to, and we can do a lot of talking. We're probably going to need a lot of shandies as we get ready for Al Snow and Head against Too Much. Oh my God. They did not show the quarterfinals so that we can show this match and the tag match, which we'll get to a little later on. Unreal. Unreal. Yeah. But in any event, so yeah, we were planning on getting the, and I was distracted, doing a video package on the history of Al Snow coming back into the WWE, which I'll get to in a sec myself and give you guys a little backstory. But the idea was to debut this on June 28th, 1998. June 28th, 2018, just a couple days ago. Had everything set up, had the total plan was rearing and ready to go. We were going to do it. It was going to air exactly at 8 p.m. And then we were going to do it straight away, dead center from there. And what ended up happening was I did not realize that you had to sign up for YouTube Live way later on, earlier on in time. I didn't realize that you had to do YouTube Live, that there had to be some configuration. You had to wait 24 hours to do so. So in doing so, I had to start my thing a little later on and figured why not do it the day before the 4th of July. Feel like people might be rearing, ready to go. Maybe you're getting your hot dogs ready. Maybe you're getting ready to get your firecrackers ready, so to speak. And maybe you want to watch a little pro wrestling and a little classic wrestling. And maybe now you just tune in and you notice Too Much is on the screen. And you're like, oh my God, it's Brian Christopher and Scott Too Hot Taylor. And Taylor had been around in WWE now for a while. I mean, and they're starting to do the Too Cool Juke and Jive there a bit. But Taylor had been in WWE for quite some time as a total job guy and was doing a lot. He had like almost like a mullet, I feel like. Was doing jobs on Superstars, Wrestling Challenge, and now all of a sudden it was like he was back, and we were supposed to be taking him somewhat seriously in this deal. Now he's Scott Too Hot Taylor, by the way, was in there as Scotty Too Hottie. That would eventually become Scotty Too Hottie, and this one-note joke that went on forever. Brian Christopher not being Jerry Lawler's son when he very clearly was Jerry Lawler's son, but I don't think anybody cared. Is still here and continuing. Now, Al Snow, I remember being really into Al Snow, believe it or not. And I think Al at the time was, he had been in WWE for quite some time. He was in WWE as Leif Cassidy, a member of the New Rockers. He was in WWE as a member of he was Avatar, where he'd come to the ring with the mask, and then he'd take the mask off. And he had a couple other little characters and bad gimmicks throughout his time in WWE. None of them worked out. He gets cast off. He goes to ECW. He actually debuts in ECW as Leif Cassidy. If you go back and watch some old ECW hardcore television, he makes a couple of appearances. It's obviously not mentioned that he's Leif Cassidy, but he's in the New Rockers gear. He looks just like Leif Cassidy. And little by little, he starts to lose his mind. And he starts freaking out about being in ECW. Wants to get back to WWF. That's his deal. He wants to get back over there. And then he eventually shows up on WWE TV. It was like, holy crap, Al Snow's actually here, and he's taking the character of wanting to be back in WWE to the WWE. And so he shows up here in the middle of 98 with the deal that he is trying to get a meeting with Vince McMahon to potentially get a contract with them. And so the idea here is that if he and Head, and yes, that's Head that he's carrying around. It's a mannequin Head. If he and Head, who, by the way, Al would often talk to, and I thought did a fantastic. This is peak Al Snow to me. And look how many people in that crowd. They haven't done anything to get Al Snow over. Look how many people in that crowd have the mannequin head from the store. And I remember wanting WWE to put those heads on sale so bad, and they never did. I did. Oh, they're putting in that. Look, there's another head that a fan has given to Al Snow. Al's just playing off on it. And I remember in 1998, and Lawler here is announced as the special guest referee. So this is just total screw job here on Al. Remember the stipulation here, by the way, that if Al wants to get a job with WWE, he has to win this match. Him and Head have to be victorious here. But as we spoke about on that, they mentioned on the Pritchard show, they don't really stick with stipulations too well. Not to give a 20-year spoiler, but even after Al loses this match, clearly Al Snow comes back pretty soon thereafter in WWE. So Lawler now is the referee, and man. But I will say, at the time, we did meet Al at a convention, and he was awesome in that he stayed in this character the entire time. So we met Al Snow, and the entire time he was having a dialogue with Head. He was talking to Head. He was acting like Head was talking to him about different things. And I also remember Al Snow just showing up randomly at different house shows, at different events, WWE shows, in the crowd, throwing up the Head. People super excited about it. Obviously, there's the clip of Al Snow doing in ECW when everyone throws the store-bought heads into the ring, those styrofoam heads. And at the time, I didn't realize you could just go to a store and ask for one of them, and that's probably how all those fans have it. So I thought that was some sort of ECW merch, and WWE wasn't re-releasing the ECW merch. But at the time, man, I was not a happy camper that I couldn't go to the store and buy a head. Fun fact, Al Snow's first WWE action figure, which was made by Jax, the bone crunching action figures, if you will, was released with a head action figure. It was a small head that came with Al, and because they thought that it was promoting slaughtering of women or something to that extent, it was pulled from the shelves. So even though the bone crunching figures these days don't have much value, if you still have one of those in box, it very well might. Now, lost in all of this is, like, Scott Taylor is a hell of a wrestler. Al Snow is not a bad wrestler either, and, I mean, it would go on to show. They used Al for a number of years in Tough Enough as the head trainer there. But at the time, I mean, you could hear a pin echo thoroughly by the crowd, just not really caring too much about the in-ring action. You could tell they were really into Al when he first came in, but at the same time, they are not really into the match itself here. And the reason why I think they aren't into the action itself is because of the fact that matches themselves didn't go that long. If you watch an old episode of Raw, there's about 300 matches that are promoted throughout that show. And they're just boom, boom, boom. By the way, now we're having our first tag team Royal Rumble over here. Now we're having our the debut of Edge. He's coming out over here. Now we're doing a bunch of different things all over the place. And it's far too much that what ends up happening is you end up losing your faith in there was too much going on. It was just you were flying. And there was a bunch of non-finishes. The matches usually wouldn't last more than 4 or 5 minutes. But it didn't matter because no one was really there for the matches. People were really there for, I know it's ridiculous to have Vince McMahon come out and cut a promo on pay-per-view when you're like, what are you promoting? We ordered the pay-per-view. But people cared more about the promo there. People cared more about the storyline. People cared more about the character development and the characters and the, they didn't necessarily want to see Stone Cold wrestle a 10-minute match. They want to see Stone Cold flip people off. And eventually, he hasn't even started drinking beer here, but flip people off and cause havoc. So even though Al here is over with Head, and every time he throws Head up, people go crazy and, chant for Head, at the time, not really much going on during the match. Look at Head over there in the corner, by the way, on the apron. And you have Brian Christopher. Now, Brian Christopher was also brought in as one of the light heavyweights, and I just remember I thought the idea behind the light heavyweights was it was supposed to be WWE's answer to the cruiserweight division, and at the time, that was like the only thing I cared about in WCW was the cruiserweight division. I thought Rey Mysterio, the Luchadors, I thought those guys were like incredible, and like seeing them was awesome. So I remember like hearing they're going to be doing their own cruiserweight division in the form of the light heavyweight division. I remember being really into that, and their answer was like Brian Christopher. I dislike Brian Christopher, but it's not necessarily somebody you want to see. Like, he's not that good. I mean, here they are. He's about a year, maybe a year or two into his run here, and Al Snow's destroying both him and Scott Taylor. Al coming with a big slam here. Al is now heading to the back. The fan, by the way, in the room has shut off. So if you see me randomly leave the screen, it'll be to turn that fan on. Scott Taylor, though, man, doing his thing, so underrated in the ring. And these guys, to think these guys who right now are paint dry boring would end up being the two most over characters in WWE just in about a year or so is pretty, testament to them. Plus for the cause. I got to turn that fan back on. I'm not sure why they don't have an option on that fan, by the way, to just turn it on. You have to crank it, and it's old school. And I'm not happy about my air conditioning already breaking. I promise I will not be a hot, sweaty mess every single week here on the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast. So if you're following along here, by the way, okay? Let's say you're just tuning in. Oh, it's Q&A 998. Cool. Let's tune in and see. You want to support me, or maybe you want to check out what the hoopla was, because there was a lot of people who were into the 20th anniversary of this show. Let me go back and watch it start to finish. And you turn this on, and you see Too Much going up against Al Snow and the Mannequin Head in a tag match. And when we get to the finish, I'm going to explain to you how you would likely explain this to a casual fan. Now, I think they were trying to do something here with Too Much, where at some point they were maybe trying to insinuate that they were, I guess, homosexual. They had done this a little later on. They were definitely hinting at that. But here they're starting to do it. You can kind of see, with some of the mannerisms that they're doing with holding each other's heads and everything like that. But 1998 is a totally different time where people are just ignorant about it. And, that's kind of used for heel heat, which is, even in 98, to think that, 98, you'd think, we're way ahead of that type stuff, but they're still using that for, to get a negative reaction is crazy. But yeah, in the idea of launching this podcast, by the way, wanted to do this on, kind of to harken back to that story, and you'll see I kind of veer from story to story as I get distracted by the show. But this is as good a match of any to give you guys a little backstory. So wanted to launch this on June 28th. Thought this would be great, especially for folks. If you're like me, you'll love something to wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. You get excited for the shows on Friday. What better way to get excited for the King of the Ring 1988 show than to watch the show in full, talk about it, watch along, have a little fun, and to be able to do that. But when I went to go sign into YouTube, realized it was a 24-hour waiting period. Didn't want to do it over the weekend, so we decided to do it here today. And at the end of the show, I'll talk to you guys about what to experience next week here on the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast on our normal time. This will not be every single week at 10 p.m. on Tuesdays. Basically because I realized that staying up till 1 a.m. is not ideal for everybody. For me, I don't care. I'd started at 1 a.m. if it were up to me. But, not so much. I do remember this match as a kid being unbelievably frustrated because I wanted Al to get this contract. So even though this is unbearable to watch now almost, to see it Too Much, and Jerry Lawler's the ref, clearly Al has absolutely no chance to win this match. I remember thinking, well, Al's a hot character. He's got to get a contract. Why would they have him show up and get the contract and not get a contract? It makes no sense. He's got to find a way to win this. So I couldn't figure out how they were going to get Lawler to be the one to take the 1, 2, 3 here. He does the snowplow. And now they announce that Too Much has won the match because Grandmaster Sexay, or Brian Christopher, has a bottle of Head and Shoulders underneath the head. So Al is gone. On the second consecutive pay-per-view, they had a stipulation where if somebody lost, they were gone. Sable had just lost. She was gone. Returned weeks later. Al's lost. And I remember thinking, oh, crap. Like, I remember as a fan who, like, the ultimate goal was to stay up till 2, 3 in the morning and watch ECW television on the MSG network. Holler if you hear me, my fellow New Yorkers. I remember thinking, damn, Al's going to show back up on ECW now. I got to watch ECW. And you could tell, like, there was still that relationship between the two. Of course, he just showed up back in WWE and get a contract just a few weeks later. So, if not right away. So, yeah, so if you were describing this to a casual fan, okay, you would explain that Al Snow was on a team with Head, Mannequin Head, and he had to win the match against the other two guys in order to get his contract. And the only way to pin somebody was to pin them to the mat and have both of their shoulders on the mat at all times for the 1, 2, 3 count. So, Al lost the match because since the Mannequin Head didn't have any shoulders, Too Much took it upon themselves to take a bottle of Head and Shoulders, put it under the Mannequin Head, and pin the head that way. Get it? Because now the Mannequin Head technically has a pair of shoulders. Blame me for taking some shandy on that one. That's why I have the shandies here. I mean, Jesus Christmas. It's not even remotely funny. That isn't funny at all. I just remember being really annoyed by the entire thing. And at this point, I have no clue what Head and Shoulders are. So the joke goes over my head because I'm 11 when this show happens. So I have no freaking clue as to what's going on. Thank God, X-Pac and Owen Hart are coming to the ring. 4 years after their great encounter in the King of the Ring 1994, I strongly recommend it. They showed a little bit there, by the way. So basically what they had to do with the King of the Ring tournament, and you're seeing all these matches kind of, boy, I'll tell you, young X-Pac, man, that face is, that's Enzo Amore. I mean, he just reminds me so much of Enzo Amore. I mean, he might be, I guess, probably can go a little more in the ring than Enzo Amore, but neither here nor there. There we go. Tilt that back a little bit. So, yeah, so what happened was, at the time on Raw, basically the entire 4-week period from Over the Edge to the King of the Ring, they were doing the King of the Ring. So they had the 3 weeks of qualifying matches, about 3 or 4 qualifying matches every episode of Raw. And then the week before the King of the Ring, they had the quarterfinals. So they basically were building up and building to the quarterfinals. Like, there was legitimate build to the quarterfinal match between Mark Miro and Jeff Jarrett. Like, weeks worth of build between that, leading up to that quarterfinal matchup. So what ended up happening is now they have a pay-per-view, and there's only 2 matches that come out of that, and that's where they have the semifinals on there. So now they need to throw all these non-announced matches, or announced with only 1 week of build matches, onto the pay-per-view that were built up from the qualifying matches. There's Owen. Now, Owen, of course, is now in his Nation of Domination. Now, I know a lot of people think Owen didn't really fit in too well with the Nation of Domination because, like, he just kind of like just randomly showed up there as part of the Nation. But I actually kind of really like the idea of the storyline that basically Owen Hart was part of the Hart Foundation. This is the storyline that they were telling kind of on the low, that Owen Hart was with the Hart Foundation. The Hart Foundation had broken up, and they were no longer a thing. Because they all leave, right? And obviously Bret Hart's out because of a screw job. Davey and Jim Neidhart gone. They go to WCW as well with Bret. But Owen is still there. They wouldn't let Owen out of his contract, and Owen, has a family. He's got to work. So he's still here. So he tries to do the right thing, and he tries to kind of embrace the fans. And what happens? He gets screwed time and time and time again by D-Generation X. And now he has no backup because he's all by himself. He never even gets his world title match against Shawn Michaels. So it makes sense that now he has a new family and joins the Nation of Domination. Yeah, I mean, that's how I took it. I thought that was pretty cool. So while this match is going on here, I'll tell you about my day leading up to on the King of the Ring in 1998, because I remember it very well. King of the Ring 98 was my sister's 9th birthday. And I was at like a pottery barn or something where like basically they wanted kids to come in and do pottery and arts and crafts, different things like that. And then they had different types of games, different types of songs, dances, all this crap, for kids. My sister's turning 9, all the little girls are there, all the little boys, whatever, everyone's having fun. It was cool. So that day, and I remember I'm now 11, right? And I've watched wrestling my whole life. Big Hulkamaniac, huge fan of a lot of, always wanted to be kind of a little out there. I'm Mr. Cool because I root for Ahmed Johnson and Savio Vega. I don't root for the top guy like everyone else. But those were my guys. Those were my favorites growing up. So at the time, that day, my sister's 9-year-old birthday, I go for the face painting portion. And the person who was doing the face painting told me, what can you want on your face? What do you want painted on your face? And so I said, can you paint on top of paint? And she said, yeah, of course, we can do that. So they're painting on my face. And I said to her, okay, I would like you to paint my entire face black. And then I want you to take the gold face paint. Now remember, I'm 11 years old. I do not have a clue what any of this means, just so you know. And I'm pretty sheltered 11-year-old, okay? I would like you to take a big gold, and I'd like you to put a big F on my left cheek, and then a big U on my right cheek. And that's what I want you to do. And the lady is horrified, disgusted. My parents are, what is wrong with you? Why would you? And I'm, oh, no, Dad, Mom. I want this not because of any, I don't understand. Why would it be a problem? It stands for Forever Unchained, and it's the gold dust face paint that he used in the Survivor Series 1997. Big FU. Suffice to say, it didn't get over too well, and I instead walked away with a big black Austin on one cheek and a 316 on the other. But I was getting ready for the King of the Ring 1998, and that birthday party ended with my sister and I. They had a big musical chairs for all the kids who were doing their thing, I guess, on the show. Look at this guy's sign. Hi, Daniel. I hope Daniel's watching, and he is hell bent on getting that Hi, Daniel sign on television. Sheesh. So anyway, my sister at that event had a big musical chairs with all the kids who were at the event, and of course, much to the chagrin of my parents, comes down to myself and my sister, and everybody, and this is building. This is, brother versus sister, big sibling rivalry. What's going to happen? My mom is audibly upset on the screen behind the camera. Oh, no, God, why'd I have to come down to them? My father gives me a little, hey, buddy, how about we do the right thing here, okay? Which clearly means take the dive, right? I think it means, okay, no worries. I'll give him the old tot spirit, and we'll show him who's boss. So music plays, beat my sister on her birthday in front of all of her friends. Stand up. My buddy Al comes running in. We recreate the D-Generation X over-exaggerated cry from the December 97 Raw where they fought for the European Championship. My buddy Al holds me up. I have my hands raised. I'm pretending to cry. He brings me around the room, drops me. We run around. DX crotch chops to everybody, all of our family members and friends that were around. Big middle fingers to everyone there. And that kind of shows you at the time. And at the time, we have no clue what the crotch chop means. We have no clue what the middle fingers mean. We're just doing it because it looks cool on television. So that's kind of at the time what being a fan during this period of time was all about. And that's why every time they pan to the crowd, it's nonstop middle fingers. It's nonstop crotch chops. That's kind of just, it's what it became. And I remember my parents being very unhappy with me. First of all, my mom announced that she forgot to add a stipulation doing her best. And X-Pac hits that Bronco Buster, almost hits Owen directly into his crotch. Wonder if that's an Owen rib, but damn, that looked nasty. In any event, they basically there's another buddy back there with his sign teasing his buddy. PJ wants head. In any event, so my mother, doing her best Vince McMahon, gets on the mic, announces that she forgot to mention there was a stipulation on the show to the game that there'd be 2 winners of this musical chairs. There'd be both a boy winner and a girl winner. So both of us were winners, which I had the biggest look of I couldn't believe it on my face. My parents were disgusted by my way of thinking, and I was told that the King of the Ring 98 would be my last show, and so I better enjoy it. I did enjoy it, and it clearly was not my last show, but I was told, like, hey, cool it with doing everything and wanting to emulate everything you see on television, because my parents weren't used to it. They had no clue that it had become so raunchy. My dad did, because he was a fan, but he loved the hell out of it. And my mom would watch the shows, the pay-per-views, and you wouldn't see as much of that on the pay-per-views. Because remember, this is before Sable Handprints. We'll get to that next month. This is before Sable Handprints. And there's, man, a little sloppy for these two. And Xbox, one of my favorites. By the way, not to just become a bunch of plugs here, but if you're not listening to Xbox Podcast, go ahead. Another interference. Mark Henry with a big splash. And not on this show, by the way, is Mark Henry. That's a very young Mark Henry, too. Not on this show is Mark Henry, but you'll see that Mark Henry at the time, and they'll start to build to China versus Mark Henry. Mark Henry's probably the one guy who deserved a match on the show, because he had a pretty fun little feud going with the Battle of the Bruisers, speak of the devil, between him and Vader. But always, every match back then, a bunch of interference. X-Pac taps, China hits Owen with the DDT behind the ref's back, and X-Pac is going to get the win, I assume. By the way, I've watched all the shows leading up to these shows, but I've not watched the shows prior, so this is all, I got to be honest, well, I've watched the Hell in a Cell probably a dozen times since it's aired. Not sure I've seen too much of this show since then, but that's fun. That's classic 1998 faction wars, so to speak. Everyone gets involved. Everyone tries to top each other. China is still badass China. Awkward to see her in X-Pac, I guess. Whatever. But she's not 100% into her character yet. She's still like the badass, like kind of the muscle of DX and not talking as much. But X-Pac with a big win. X-Pac actually, this is only his first handful of matches. Remember when he came over from WCW, he was still injured. The injury that cost him his job at WCW. So he comes into WWE and he can't go right away. He's not wrestling right away. So he is he's kind of the hype man for DX. And I remember thinking he wasn't going to be a wrestler and he was just going to be someone to kind of be there with the, because he had such great promos. Rest in peace, Vader. My God. Gotta love him. Totally hits that move and busts his ass immediately following, gets up like nothing's happened, total badass, and continues to go. But that's a match I'd like to have seen. I'd prefer to have seen that match than the first match there, than that awful Al Snow stuff, or the first match there between the Headbangers and the Time Tie. So you'll see Paul Bear. Now, there's certainly, you watch these shows, and WWE is certainly cutting some stuff out. I'm not sure if it's ads. I'm assuming it's some sort of ads. At the time, they were doing an ad campaign for the Super Soakers. So they were transitioning out of being super kid-friendly, but still realizing that kids were still watching the show, despite the material not really being for kids. So everything was still about Super Soakers. Oh, there's some of the super fans back there. Faith No More guy. Vladimir, I think, is there next to him, too. So Paul Bear, we were getting into him a little bit earlier. They had the tag Hell in a Cell match where it was Undertaker and Stone Cold against Kane and Mankind. And they did a deal where Taker didn't show up, and Vince McMahon was accusing Taker of being in cahoots with Kane and Mankind. So it almost looked like Undertaker maybe was in cahoots because he didn't show up for the match. It was just Stone Cold against those two in a handicap match. Eventually, those guys make their way to the outside. So Stone Cold, Kane, and Mankind make their way to the outside of the Hell in a Cell, leaving Paul Bearer all alone in the cell. Taker comes up from the ground, destroys Paul Bearer, rips him apart. He's bleeding everywhere. Paul then is cutting promos in his house all night, talking about how he's still going to be there at King of the Ring. And this is the footage you see of Taker destroying him. And according to the Pritchard Show, Taker actually injured himself during that beatdown of just destroying shit in the living room, which caused a major problem because now you had Taker, who was having some issues now with his leg. His ankle's destroyed. And you have Stone Cold dealing with a staph infection. So two of the two biggest babyfaces on the show, who are the two cogs of the summer programming for WWE from a babyface perspective, are pretty banged up. Taker would be banged up, too, for quite some time. If you remember, this is the beginning, very early, of Taker causing so much havoc and eventually transitioning into Ministry Taker. He would make appearances on the show, show up like 2-3 different times, wipe everybody out. I'll get into that in a sec as well. And look at Paul Bearer, man. Must he rest in, may he rest in peace as well. Sad you watch these shows and so many of these guys are gone. Paul, though, I did get to meet in 2014. He passed away in 2014. 2011, I met Paul Bearer at an Access, which was really cool. One of the sweetest men you'll ever meet. This is, by the way, now Paul Bearer is a little bit of a redhead. He was the jet black hair the entire time he's with The Undertaker, but is now with, I guess now a heel, so he's got red hair. But yeah, they were doing these ads with Super Soakers where basically DX would show up on different types of sets and show up with the Super Soakers and just drench like some random geek, another jump cut. They just got rid of something there. Not sure what that was. But they would show up and they'd douse whoever, Michael Cole, Doc Hendricks, whomever, with the Super Soakers. And the Super Soakers were kind of positioned in a way where you knew that they were coming from. Which of course led to many Super Soaker fights as a kid growing up, where you'd have a bunch of folks, doing water gun fights with, between our legs, and I'm doing that's too much. But you get the idea. All right. So while this match is going on here, I will talk to you guys. So I did mention this. I'm going to go ahead on to the history of the WWE site, just because of the fact that I did mention that a couple of weeks prior to this, I was at a WWE house show. So we're going to get into that show while this is going on. The reason I'm going to do that is because, much respect to the New Age Outlaws. They're doing their thing here. You can hear Road Dogg do his little speech here. And God bless him. But they're in a match here, and they're going to have a match here with the New Midnight Express, which made no sense. And I'll explain why in 1 second. So the New Midnight Express were Bombastic Bob and Bodacious Bart. And it was Bob Holly and Bart Gunn doing their thing. And it was them in a new group, basically recreating the Midnight Express. What was really annoying about this match is there's literally no point for it. They actually had a tag team battle royal to determine the number one contenders for the tag titles for this show, and it was announced on the Raw that this was for the King of the Ring, and it was a tag team battle royal, and Kane and Mankind won. So it's kind of like, what are they going to do? They're going to have Kane and Mankind do wrestle for the tag titles, and then later on have their respective Hell in a Cell and title matches. It made zero sense. But during that match, the Midnight Express were the first team eliminated. And there wasn't great teams in this. I mean, I think they had like Scorpio and Terry Funk. They had Farouk and Steve Blackman. They had 10 teams, and like half of them were junk. They had the DOA, they had LOD 2000, and this is not like Legion of Doom or Road Warriors that you grew up with. This is like LOD 2000 with Sonny as a manager, right before Hawk eventually goes off the deep end. It was awful. The less said about it, the better. They had like brutal teams that were a part of this thing, and even with those awful teams, Midnights were thrown out first. And now here they are wrestling for the tag titles, or at least against the Outlaws on this show. It makes absolutely no sense. So while this match is going on, by all means, you could enjoy it. But I will talk about that at the time. I did go to a WWE house show, and at the time growing up, I was at many WWE house shows. Lucky enough to go to many of them, but I did not go to any pay-per-views or even TV tapings. TV tapings I started to go to really around this time, 98, 99, more so 2000 was really like every TV taping we were at. But we went to one TV taping and my parents hated it. They thought it was boring. There was too much downtime. There was like a commercial break where there was literally nothing going on. It just, you'd sit in the crowd. It'd be on commercial, boom. You'd sit there. It was black. The screen was nothing. All you saw was this. I wouldn't even see my hand. You saw nothing. And it was not as much fun as going to a house show, which at the time felt like that was a big deal. It felt like that was your big live event that you were going and you were watching and you were enjoying. So my parents would take me to house shows all the time. Also at the time, let's be honest, they were definitely cheaper than SummerSlam or to go at WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, those pay-per-views. So I never even knew that there was an option to go to these pay-per-views until I got a little bit older. So for me, house shows were where it was at. I did attend a house show with a bunch of my friends in New York City, Madison Square Garden, June 5th, 1998, in front of a sold-out crowd. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, this is the hottest thing in the world. I remember thinking, wow, wrestling is super popular, and recognizing, like, no longer is it, you have a wrestling shirt on, isn't that fake? It suddenly became like everybody wanted to wear wrestling shirts. Everyone had the D-Generation X down here shirt, or the two-word suck it shirt, or the Smoking Skull Austin 316 shirt. Everybody had these shirts, and it became just like the super cool thing to do. And at the time, now I'm in middle school, and me and my friends had formed our own nation of domination, so to speak. And so for a while, it was started by somebody who was a friend of ours. He was Farouk, because he was the leader of the nation. My buddy was The Rock, and our other friend, who was a hefty fella, was Mark Henry, and I was D'Lo Brown, and I'd walk up and down the hallway, and I can't do that now because now I'm old, and I'm thinking of that may actually cause a migraine, and I don't necessarily want that. So at the time, that was what we did, and and my buddy, who was The Rock, stayed in character all the time. I mean, all the time. Cut promos on teachers with the belt on. We almost got kicked out of the school because eventually, Farouk, my friend Christian, ended up being on the outs with the crew because Farouk was kicked out of the real nation. My other buddy, Michael, kind of ended up emerging as our new leader of the nation, right? So we'd walk with him down the hall. He'd be the cool kid. And now, rather than Christian, who weeks before was our legit friend, we now wanted to get rid of him. We were like, we're done with the guy. And I remember going into this MSG show, my mother being like, oh, I'm getting tickets for you and your friends. And I said, whatever you do, just please don't get tickets for Christian. We're no longer cool with him. Because in real life, Farouk was kicked out of the nation. So my buddy Christian was kicked out of our group of friends, the nation. And it eventually came to a head where they legit, my two friends, brawled around our school auditorium and ended up going through a table that I guess was, for whatever reason, gimmicked. And me trying to get everyone back in full D'Lo Brown. And eventually we all were in the principal's office. It was not a good story. But thankfully, none of us got suspended. It was just, hey, quit dicking around. But Christian was not welcome to the show. And the worst part about it was we were at the Long Island Railroad heading to the Madison Square Garden show. And he lived on top of the Bayside station of Long Island Railroad. So this kid is sitting there watching us below, sad as can be, like, hey guys, I guess I'm not invited. We were like, no, you're out. You're not in the nation. And he was very upset. But to think about the level of silliness there. But listen to this card here at the Madison Square Garden show. So you had the Headbangers defeating Too Much. Farouk and Mark Henry ended up fighting to a no contest. And I do remember this. The Undertaker continued to come out and destroy people because he wanted something from Vince McMahon. He was like, he put out a challenge to Vince McMahon or something like that. So he kept coming out and causing havoc, wanting to get an answer to what he wanted. Scorpio defeated my main man, D'Lo Brown. Dustin Runnels and Terry Funk defeated Savio Vega and Jose Estrada Jr. Dustin is in the process now of just starting his Thank You God gimmick. Ken Shamrock defeated Owen Hart in a submission match. Tag champs, The Outlaws defeated the Legion of Doom. Jeff Jarrett defeated Steve Blackman, and I'm sure that was a barn burner. Co-main event, European champion Triple H defeats Vader. And then the main event, the world champion Steve Austin and The Undertaker defeating McCain and Mankind in a no-holds-barred tag match. And if there's a couple things I remember from this, one, I remember being super stoked. There was a tag match in the main event. I still to this day do not understand. I guess, so I understand why they end up promoting house shows with title matches on that. I know that for the fan himself, Joe Blow, who's going there, the first thing they're going to look for if they're going to a show is, oh, is the title on the line? Oh, who's the champion? Who is he defending the title against? I know that, like, from a casual fan perspective, but if little me, who's going to these shows here, now I'm 11 years old, clearly with the maturity of a 5-year-old after my Nation story from earlier, I'm going to these shows. I have no interest in world title matches on house shows because I know the title's not changing hands. So for me, a big tag match like that, like, yeah, hell yeah, let's go down there and see that. Taker and Austin against Kane and Mankind. We know they'll tear the house down. So that's cool. For me, like, I think they should do those all the time. I think, and now I'm sure they do for, Brock's not on the show, but, give me Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns against, I don't even know who they'd be going, I guess against Ziggler and McIntyre, so to speak. Give me that match over, Brock defending against Roman. Roman's not winning the belt on that house show. Then again, I will say one of the cooler live moments I've had happened last year when AJ won the U.S. title on a house show. It happens few and far between, is my point. So one of the other things I really remember about this show, and they actually showed this on an episode of Raw, is that it was announced that SummerSlam tickets were going to be going on sale. I don't know if it was this night or they announced that SummerSlam was coming to MSG, which was something that at the time you got to remember. Yes, the Wrestling Observer newsletter was around, but like if you're a kid like myself, you do not know about it. Like it just we wouldn't really hear about it from anyone. This is like still in the infancy of the internet. So a lot of things you wouldn't necessarily hear like, hey, tickets are, SummerSlam is coming to Madison Square Garden. So you have to go to the show, and then at the show when they announce it, to be like, oh my God, we're getting SummerSlam. It's coming to Madison Square Garden. We can go to that show. Let's get there. And that became like, that was, I remember the first time where it really hit me that there was a live WWE show and I could attend that show if I want to and try to get tickets. Even though my parents were saying it was expensive, I was like, we're going to go. We're going to go to the SummerSlam show. And hold off on whether or not I made it to that show for 2 months until we do our SummerSlam 1998 review. But that was something that was really fun about the show. It was announced that the SummerSlam 1998 was coming to the show. Everyone lost their minds. This was like a huge deal. From that, they started showing on Raw the DX celebration videos, which DX paraded the streets of New York. They tried to ask people if they were excited about SummerSlam. They were asking people if they were like ready for the pay-per-view, this, that, and the third. It was interesting. It was cool to see. Like that was really, in my opinion, what started DX on the DX, the chicanery that we all know and love of DX, was them hitting the streets. I remember they did this. They asked women to just pull out their breasts. They asked cops to do the suck it with them. And they were going around. Originally, the reason for that was going around asking people if they're ready for SummerSlam. So if you go back and you watch, I believe it's the June 1st or June 8th Raw, they actually show, it's June 8th. They follow DX around through the streets of New York City with some really fun little vignettes of them just going around, dicking around, and promoting that SummerSlam is coming to town. So that was really cool. And that stuff led to the beginning, the promotion rather, of the DX tape. That's right, the VHS tape. You feel old now. And the big promotion of that was that you'd have unseen, uncensored version of their clips of them going to New York City, and they'd actually show you the women taking off their tops in the middle of New York City. So that's out there somewhere if you want to see 20-year-old footage like that. But at the time, 11-year-old kid, that was big time. So, and I talked throughout that entire match. So I do hope you enjoyed that entire match. If you had it on in the background, and hopefully my discussion about going to the house show and being there live was something that you guys got a little more out of than the match between the Outlaws and Midnight Express. But I will say, always fun to see Jim Cornette doing his thing. These jump cuts are so odd, dude. These are, by the way, yes, this is a Nightmare Before Christmas cup. Yes, my wife has a Sally cup. We typically both sit down, me and my Jack, her and her Sally, and sit together drinking our coffee in the morning, glaring into each other's eyes. So here comes Triple H. He's doing commentary at the time. Now, I do know on the picture show they bury him. I remember at the time thinking he was so cool. Like, the idea that this guy was out there and he is going to do some really goofy commentary for the finals of this King of the Ring tournament, which is a total throwaway. Again, by the way, this should close the show. The show is the King of the Ring. I don't care if they have a title match, a Hell in a Cell. The finals of the King of the Ring should be the end of the King of the Ring tournament. Even if it does have a random, look how cool Hunter is. Coming out, he's got his little hat. He's got his Hunter hat on, the DX logo on the front. He's got China with him. China's got the little DX hat. Hunter is about as cool as the other side of the pillow here. Look at him, ripping his shirt like the Hulkster. Spitting water in the air while he does the crotch chop. He's still a year or so away from, not even a year or so. It's crazy to think DX, peak DX, which to me is the first run of Hunter, X-Pac, the Outlaws in China, only goes a calendar year. Starts the day after WrestleMania 14, ends at WrestleMania 15 with Hunter turning on X-Pac. It's crazy. He's coming into his own, though, as a leader of DX, but I don't think he was even close to being a top guy yet. He was definitely a notch below. I actually, and this is this feud between the Nation and DX eventually culminates at SummerSlam with Triple H defeating The Rock for the Intercontinental title. And I remember being floored that Hunter won the Intercontinental title because he just felt below The Rock and below Shamrock, and he didn't really. I just didn't think he belonged in the same breath as those guys. I don't even know why. I just think because of the fact that he was always being silly and being kind of like that fraternity type guy. I feel like, with that being said, him in this role, it kind of took his credibility away a little bit of being like a main eventer. As crazy as that sounds, I remember at the time just thinking, man, it'd be so cool. I remember there was like an I Quit match for the world title where Triple H had to quit because they were threatening to beat up China. And I remember thinking, like, man, it would be so cool if Hunter won the title. Looking back, he's not even close. And I also you'll start to notice back in '98, this is the start of them throwing in like smart fan references, and I'm sure it appealed to some folks, but over my head back then when I was a kid. This is the first time though that the nickname for The Rock, the Croc, is mentioned. I believe Triple H calls him, and I always remember this for some reason. Triple H refers to him as the Croc, and then says, or, let me hold off. Obviously, we all know what he was probably going to call him. But here comes Shamrock again. Total crazed. Triple H is in rare form, saying that Ken Shamrock is either in the zone or thinking about the ham sandwich he had earlier. That guy with the blonde hair has been on this about 100 times. No recollection of this finals match between these guys. Literally King of the Ring 98. I'm not kidding you. If you ever found it in my the tape in my my father would always record all the pay-per-views because he knew that he was paying a lot of money for those shows, and he knew that if he did not record them, that likely I would ask for that video cassette for my birthday or for some occasion. So figured, fuck it, I'll return first F-bomb on the show. At this point, 10 to 12. So if I drop an F-bomb, I think it could slide. But yeah, my father knew if he did not record the show, I'd ask for it. So he'd record it, and he'd have like a little comments on the box, so I'd remember what to watch. And I think like on that box, it was like King of the Ring 98, Hell in a Cell, Mick Foley dies, or something like that. Like it was ridiculous. But so if you ever found my tape of the King of the Ring 98, it would almost always be at the end of the Hell in a Cell match. Usually like Foley going up and he's, being taken away in a stretcher and away he goes. So while I thought The Rock was coming into his own as a character, I thought that really wasn't great in the ring. It still took a little while to get really good in the ring. I actually think Rock got really good in the ring on his way out. I think like 2000, he's obviously, like his popularity peaks in 2000. Like Austin is 98, 99. Rock is 2000. And then I think that's where they built up the biggest WrestleMania main event of all time, in my opinion. At least going into it, the WrestleMania 17 match. Because it's the biggest star of 98, 99 against the biggest star of 2000. I think Rock's matches, though, like his matches in 2001, 2002, I think are like his best matches when he's in the company. And it's crazy to think that, he was out the door. Now, Shamrock here, even though he's in the King of the Ring finals, this to me feels like a step down for him because Shamrock's already main evented pay-per-views. If you remember, Bret Hart even offered to, I believe he offered to drop the belts to Shamrock at some point in order to avoid dropping it to Shawn Michaels. So Chyna's not said much of anything throughout her entire time. She's now doing commentary with the Spanish commentary team. And it was kind of like, oh crap, Chyna's talking. Hunter's, just being completely jovial. But yeah, because Shamrock was in the world title picture, it's kind of like, why is he in the King of the Ring tournament? I mean, he was super over, but he was, in my opinion, he was accepted as a top guy. And I know that he wrestled for the Intercontinental title in the middle of 98, but I felt at that point, if you were in a world title picture main event, this was like way before the time when, God bless him, R-Truth was main eventing pay-per-views, or a guy like, I hate to do this because I do think like he totally came into his own as world champion, but a guy like Jinder Mahal, where you'd watch him in a main event and you can totally expect that like at some point he may not be in the main event picture, and you could accept that because like at one point he was nowhere near the main event picture, right? So Shamrock, I feel like him now being at that top level in 97, when either you're a huge guy, like you're a big guy like a Vader, Psycho Sid, those types of guys, who they'd show up, boom, they're in the main event, or an established guy is in the main event, like a Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, those guys. But if you were a main eventer, you were a main eventer, in my opinion. Hunter spits water all over the Rock. So yeah, so I thought Shamrock, I mean, he main evented D-Generation X in Your House. So for me, he's the main eventer. And then he was kind of just pushed right back down the card, and I was really always kind of confused by it because I thought he held his own. I actually thought they could have given the belt to him. And instead here, he kind of wins the belt. And if you think about it, I mean, yes, when Brett was in the first King of the Ring, Brett had been champ before. But after that, they kind of have established that the King of the Ring was, you win the King of the Ring, that rock gets strapped to your ass, and you're going to be in the main events for the time being. Even in '95, when Mabel won the King of the Ring, he then was in the SummerSlam main event immediately following. So if you think about it, like Owen won the King of the Ring, he was in the main event of SummerSlam. Mabel won main event of SummerSlam. Austin won and really stuttered a bit. Like he took a little while, but eventually up to the top. Same thing with Triple H. And you hadn't had a guy really go from world title picture back down to build themselves back up to eventually get back to the world title picture, which is what they kind of were doing with Shamrock, I guess. That's good stuff, by the way. Leinie Kugel's Orange Shandy. A great choice if you're looking for a good summery beer. This is really when they start the time period in WWE where they start to bend the rules all the time. Throw him into the barricade, no big deal. The ref is nowhere to be found. I don't know what he's doing. And that guy, I'll tell you right now, the guy with the blonde hair in the first row, if you go back and watch him, talk about a guy who's having the time of his life. He probably paid a lot for those tickets. And again, he does seem to have something around his neck, like a golden ticket or something like that. He is doing his thing, and he's having fun with it. Rock just spit at a fan. And like hawked a loogie at a fan. JR is actually pointing out the fact that Shamrock's huffing and puffing, and Shamrock, it looks like he's huffing and puffing, so I'm not sure about the reasoning for that. By the way, there's the fans there in the front row, because this is in Pittsburgh, so it's not terribly far from where Philly is, 6-7 hours, but you have a lot of ECW faithful down there. I mentioned Faith No More guy, but you see a lot of those fans that used to be at a lot of those ECW shows wearing old ECW shirts and the like. I wonder if Mike Johnson was down there from PW Insider. You go back and you watch some of the old Raws, you can see Mike being down there in the front row. It's always funny. Yeah, so they really kill Triple H's commentary here in this match on the Pritchard show, which I actually thought was funny because Bruce usually loves Triple H and always talks about how great Triple H is, this, that, and third. But, yeah. What I always thought was basically at the time, I'm a huge proponent of watching wrestling. One of the ideas of this podcast is that we watch the show together. And I'm a big fan of watching wrestling with others. And so I will usually mention, if I'm not at a show live, I'll harken back to what it was like to watch said show live. Because unless I was out of town, down in Florida visiting grandparents, the pay-per-views were live and we were watching them together as a family. And eventually it was together as friends. And now it's together as a family with my own family, my wife and my brother-in-law and whomever else we dig out of mothballs who wants to come to the show. And usually it's a couple of friends and the women get together and pay somewhat attention to one or two matches, but the fellas are on their edge of the seat and we're all having a good time. So, back then, my father, I'll always remember, and I'll harken back to, my late father, many a time. My dad was always the type of person who would always so we all knew it was at this point, everyone's now WWE is out in the mainstream big time. And people knew it was fake, right? People knew it was at least rumored to not be true. And so I remember my father always kind of watching super close and pointing out, yeah, you see that, you see that, you see that? He's got him in a headlock, but he's talking to him. Rock's talking to Shamrock. And you could see it actually a few times in this match. But I remember my father just got such a kick out of it. Guy in the front row is in the Austin 316 shirt, not putting his middle fingers down. He is having the time of his life, throwing his middle fingers up. A sign of the times. Yep. See, Rock's not as smooth with that spinning DDT where he comes around from the other end and catches the guy in the headlock, knocks him down. By the way, just throwing it out there, I'm not personally going to do this, but if you've been watching the entire time, maybe you want to hit the pause for the cause and do your thing, because next up is the Hell in a Cell and business is about to pick up. So, if you want to let things continue to roll, go do your thing. But I will say, Rock and Shamrock are turning it up. These guys are another two that have had many, many matches down the road. They had a couple of them. They had one at, I think this is the rubber match. I think this is the third. I think they had one at Rumble. They had one at WrestleMania 14. And they had one here. And I think they were 1-1. Rock was, see, at the time, it really was. Like half the matches you'd see on the show were really the Nation would interfere, DX would interfere. You'd have so many guys interfering. It was crazy. By the way, I'll take a minute to give a shout out to the Wretched Wrestling Podcast guys. Those guys were kind enough to pump out our promotion for our show, and really appreciate that. So cheers to Fred and Craig and the guys over at Wretched Wrestling. They have a great podcast going on. They've been doing it now for a couple of years. Go ahead and check them out. This, by the way, and in case you're wondering, like, hey, where did this kind of come from? Like, this wasn't much promotion. I kind of gave really shit notice on this on purpose. I wanted to get comfortable with this early on, and with the hope that, like, hey, maybe not everyone tunes in. If this craps to bed, if 10 minutes in the feed goes out, or a few minutes in the WWE Network goes out, like we did have early on, I'll be able to kind of finick around with it and get things situated. But wanted to get things going on that. So that is why, if you're wondering, hey, this wasn't really talked about, you gave us a day notice, this was weird, I'll be promoting these much more over the next few months. And as we continue on our journey on the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast. I was fully aware, though, that, and I am fully aware that in the beginning, as we get started here, I'm going to be talking live by myself. And I'm understanding of that. In all honesty, for me, this is cool to share my stories, to have that at this outlet to do this. My wife does work nights. A lot of people know that. So a lot of time I found myself just watching along on the WWE Network. So I figured, shit, I'm going to watch anyway. Give myself something to watch and a reason to watch it. Away we go. Have a couple shandies and some coffee at the same time because I'm weird. But it is what it is. And JR, this is the third or fourth time he's mentioned Ken Shamrock's fatigue. The dude's struggling. Why keep mentioning it? Clearly, despite looking like, an Adonis, he's struggling a bit with his cardio and being able to hang there with the Rock. Rock looks fine. Mike Chioda, who's still with the company. Look at him back there. I will say, Shamrock was kind of the precursor to the idea of the Brock Lesnar going over from MMA and doing his thing, or now obviously Ronda's a part of things. Shamrock was first. He was in UFC and was legitimately known as the world's most dangerous man for coming to WWE, and was just, boom, he's back in it, and he was a full-time guy and never took time off, did every show, and doesn't even, he doesn't even have any aura of, like, celebrity, I guess. And granted, UFC was really small, as we talked about earlier, but crazy to see. I will say that ankle lock is one badass finisher, though. And Shamrock wins it with the ankle lock. That ankle lock would obviously eventually move on to Kurt Angle's finisher. It's crazy that Ken ends in 99 and you never see him again. Yeah, he's never been back in WWE. He's never showed up again. It's weird. There is I don't recall. I'm actually watching this here with a little intent because I'm wondering if there was any crown, or I'm assuming there wasn't. But it would be so cool to see Ken Shamrock in a crown and a scepter, robe, all that. Be cool. Because he's so super serious. It would be cool to humanize Ken a little bit. He's not even smiling about this. He doesn't even look remotely stoked that he doesn't. Yeah, he's hands in the air. He looks super pumped up, but like, would he kill the guy to crack a grin? You just won the King of the Ring, dude. How are we supposed to get behind this guy as like our guy? I mean, he's super, really underrated in the ring, though. I mean, his reversal there to that ankle lock is badass. The days of the heel commentator basically just saying he didn't see Rock actually tap out when you can clearly, as clear as day, see The Rock tapping out. Yeah, and instead of, I get that is his character, but the big crazy scream ain't doing it for me, man. Triple H looks remotely like as if like this wasn't even, could barely be bothered with anything. I guess they just didn't have anything for him, and he was super over at the time, so throw him out there, let him do some commentary. JR now has started to wear, he's been wearing it for a while, but the pronounced Black Resistol hat, and looks super spiffy in his tuxedo with his little hanky and everything. So it's time for the Hell in a Cell, and obviously this is the biggest match on the show, probably where most of you have tuned in. I'll make sure to go back here and get the timestamp if anyone wants to just go boom straight through and see how to go from there. So the idea of the Hell in a Cell here, this is only the second Hell in a Cell. First one was obviously Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And right here, I got Mick Foley's book, Have a Nice Day, Tale of Blood and Sweat Socks. This book was the first legit, I'm not kidding you, 11 years in life, the first book that I wanted to read on my own. I had obviously read a lot of WWF magazine at the time growing up. This was the first time where I was like, I want to read this book, and it became an obsession. So here comes Mick Foley. I think they've cut something out there, probably a video package. But Mick talks in his book about when he had watched the first Hell in a Cell with Terry Funk. And he talked about how he was really worried about how, Taker's leg was all banged up. Taker had an injury. And living up to that Hell in a Cell match, he knew it was going to be tough. So he figured, why not try something different and start up on the top of the cell? And he talks about how even Terry Funk says, you've got to do something different because honestly, it's going to be hard to top that match. So he talks about how Foley and The Undertaker do, when they originally talk about the match, Undertaker says, like, why are you obsessed with killing yourself? Well, no, we're not going to start on the top of the cell, and straight up refuses until Mick lays it out and says, listen, I don't want people to not be invested in this match. You're banged up. We're not going to be able to have as good a match as the match that I've had with Shawn Michaels, that you had with Shawn Michaels at Bad Blood. But if we start out with a bang, then we'll be able to live up to, maybe people will forget about the fact that the match isn't as good as that match if we have something to kind of start with. So that was, obviously I'm paraphrasing, but that was the thought behind it. And Mick was also worried, because as we mentioned earlier, they've already had 6 pay-per-views. This is kind of like this match revisited. And Mick even talks about how he was a cold character at the time. Crowd really wasn't invested in Mankind. And now, now he had just gone from Cactus Jack. He was the 3 phases of Foley, Royal Rumble. Then he goes into Cactus Jack. He's in the thing with Terry Funk. He turns on the fans. He's a heel now, and he's working as Dude Love. He's up with Vince McMahon. Clearly gets rid of that. And then he gets fired, so the fans start to feel a little bad for him. Then he comes back. Now he's corporate Mankind in a corporate suit, but he's back with Paul Bearer. It was a weird period for Mick, and it's just cool to hear that he was cognizant of that and felt that he needed to do this. And then what I will say is I probably won't. One thing I'm not going to really get into. A lot of people watch this type of stuff and say, obviously, this day and age, it's hard to watch when somebody takes a chair shot to the head. And yeah, it is. It sucks. I would cringe if I saw it today. Taker is an absolute maniacal beast, by the way, for walking through that pyro, having the pyro go right up beside him and not even twitching. The dude is he's awesome. But yeah, I mean, so I'm not going to sit here and just say, that stuff, it's hard to watch. And you got to understand that at that time, it is what it was. And kudos to those people who did it. And it was, it's why every time I've seen Mick Foley, I've always said thank you. Because the sacrifice that he made is legit real. And I mean, he'll be the first to say he's been compensated handsomely for it. But the idea that this guy went into this match, was designed for him to take a fall off the top of the cell. And it was also, we'll get to the second bump as it happens. And you can see, and it's funny because they actually mentioned this on the Pritchard show. And that's why I really wish we were able to get ours out on that Thursday prior, because I hate to keep harkening back to that, but you can't help but use it as a resource. I mean, Bruce has knowledge like no one else. So they talk about how you can tell on the top there's the zip ties for where Foley's fallen. So the thought has always been, was that second bump planned? Well, supposedly, we'll get there, and I'll dip out a bit here and see if I can make this louder, if you guys can hear it at all, as they're kind of going up to the top of the cell. There you go. So they start off here. They're going up to the top. And I remember just thinking, because they've only had one and Shawn Michaels takes the bump kind of off the top, I just expect that's exactly what's going to happen at this show during this match. This, to me, even at 11 years old, we're going to go up to the top of the cell. And my father's favorite wrestler was Undertaker. And I just remember him saying, I love UT, but again, just wasn't even. We're watching this match now. We're on the top of the cell. The family is checked out. People are going to use the restroom. My dad's grabbing a beer to get ready for Taker, for Kane and Austin, and let Taker and Mankind do their thing. I'm intently watching because I intently watch every single piece of WWF footage at the time. And I'm like, oh my God, they're falling. They're falling. He's going to throw him off. I know he's going to throw him off because he did that with Shawn, and I bet he's going to throw him off. So now I'm gathering everyone there. Mick's getting closer to the side of the cage, and here we go. There's so much that makes this moment. Number one's the bump. Completely insane. Number two is JR. He's unbelievable. His call of, good God Almighty, as God is my witness, that man is broken in half. Number three is the crowd, who is in absolute hysterics for several minutes after Foley goes off the top of the Hell in a Cell. Losing their mind. There's people literally putting their hands in the air, looking around. People are jumping for joy. People are high-fiving. People are losing their mind. Next, is it not only does Mick Foley not move at all after he goes through the cell, but Hugo Savinovich does not move at all. He's still in the same spot because you got to remember, Hugo is there right next to the table when Mick falls and falls to his left. Like, he kind of just like, well, and he's just sitting there in the chair, tilted over, and not moving at all for quite some time. And last is Undertaker. This badass. I mean, not looking the slightest bit concerned. He's looking like total demonic demon. He's just staring down like the biggest badass you've ever seen. The cell eventually, if I'm not mistaken, starts to rise up while this is going on. And they just keep replaying this thing. Mick nails it too. I mean, he nails it. He looks like a crash test dummy. And yeah, man, those Spanish announcers, no one mentions that. They are right there the entire time. Taker looking like he must have earned that Lord of Darkness name at that moment. So Vince McMahon and Slaughter are out here. And they said on the Something to Wrestle With show that supposedly this was not planned. Vince just came out and felt that he was legitimately concerned for Mick Foley's well-being. And that's why he came out. Wanted to make sure he was okay. Slaughter's also out there. I'm not sure why I find Slaughter so funny. So they start raising the cage. This is the moment because they start raising the cage, and as they're raising the cage, everybody's looking up at Undertaker. And they have this great shot. I believe it's coming up. Maybe it's like from under where the cell is, where they're looking up at Undertaker. And he is peering down, completely emotionless. And probably my favorite Undertaker moment. Now, granted, this is the all-time Mick Foley moment, right? A lot of people love this moment of Mick Foley. I love Mick Foley the person more than I do Mick Foley the performer. I could tell you a million Mick Foley stories that would make you appreciate the man. Vince McMahon is totally, I mean, keep in mind at the time, Vince McMahon is the biggest heel in the company. And he looks scared. There's that shot I'm talking about with Taker. Just looking around. This is my fucking, sorry again. This is my fucking yard. And he just looks awesome. Crowd's chanting for Taker. I remember at our house here stopping the video of this and having to replay because they gave you like a replay afterwards. So we recorded that because we went back and watched The Fall so many times. We were just blown away by this. And my favorite is, of course, you see Terry Funk with Foley. And you'll see in a sec that the man loses his shoes. So Mick is now. I remember a lot of people thinking this was done. We at the house had thought it was done because at the time, while we didn't have news, like there was no news outlets. And here comes Mick. He's coming back now, looking like a badass on top of badass, like he's ready to just kill the man. Trying just to get to the part where Foley talks about in his book. And they're back on top of the cell. And then, now this one, so supposedly what was supposed to happen here with the second bell, with the second fall, which King actually nails that call with it. That's it, he's dead. JR is adding to it with the enough's enough. Supposedly, according to the purchase, what was supposed to happen was that was supposed to just fall, eventually give, but Mick is like hanging on and then goes down. But and we at one point thought, for sure, it's done. So now so a couple things here. Watching in our house now the family's losing their mind. My sister thinks this is the most awesome thing that's ever existed. I'm now very concerned. That's always how I was. Everyone was talking about how great it was, how awesome it was. I was very concerned. Mick Foley does not look good. You could tell pretty much right away that he does not look good. And also, by the way, remember, I'm thinking this is my last ever wrestling show as a fan. So I'm pleading now with we've got to see what happens tomorrow night. We've got to see what happens tomorrow night. Because also, by the way, Mick's got no mask on, you'll notice. So now we're like, oh, shit, this is real. Like, they really want to stop this match, and Taker's not letting them. Gathering the spot, by the way, in the Foley book was when I picked up to show it to you guys. I lost my place. So I thought one of the crazier things here about this match is that it just continues here. And you almost forget that, like, it's not a bad match. And Mick will talk about that. I did want to mention want to read from his book here. Talks about the reaction from the crowd. The reaction of the crowd was phenomenal. I have never experienced or seen a reaction like it before, and I doubt I will ever again. For several days after the fact, I would watch the video, and it never ceased to be amazed by the reaction. It was like a chain reaction, as every single person in the building stood up, even though there was nothing left to see but a prone human body laying underneath what used to be a table. Good God, he's been, I'd hear, and I'd rewind the tape. Good God, he's rewind. Good God, rewind. The reaction lasted for minutes, changing from yells of disbelief to rhythmic hockey chants of Undertaker, clap, 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 clap. And Foley actually talks about how when he came back from the entranceway, he would have changed the way that the fight on the top of the cage. And here's what he says, and I think it's a great point. He says, if I could change one thing about the match, it would be my next effort. A dynamic exchange of punches atop the 16-foot structure would have sent the crowd into an absolute frenzy. But instead I stood there, slug-like, as Undertaker battered me without any retaliation. He clubbed me once across my back with the chair and then unceremoniously dropped it on the cage. I really wish he would have put it somewhere else. Then he grabbed my neck for the quote-unquote goozle, or the chokeslam. I didn't remember a thing about the next 2 minutes as I watched the tape in great pain the next day. It was the only time in 15 years I had been knocked out cold. So think about that. He's still in this match, knocked out cold. I had been knocked goofy countless times. I had seen stars and rainbows and black patches as a way of life for a long time. But this was the first time that period of time elapsed, and I wasn't aware of it. Like I said earlier, however, video and time have helped me to not only see, but remember almost everything. Everything except what I was feeling as I broke through the mesh, and crashed to the canvas. Looking back on it now, it was both the worst chokeslam and the best chokeslam that I had ever taken. The worst because it was the only time in my association with The Undertaker that I haven't gone high for the goozle. So think about this. He's just gotten thrown off the top of the cell, through the chair, through the table, taken the craziest bump in the history of the WWF, WWE, whatever. Comes back up, and he's criticizing himself because when he takes the choke slam, he didn't get up high enough for it. Could you imagine? And I made mention on this on the Something to Wrestle With, but could you imagine if he had gotten up higher and then took that bump and went right through and crashed all the way down onto the hard mat? It would have been crazy. The best, because if I had taken it correctly, I very well might have been dead. Bang! There you go. As it was, I landed hard on my back, my neck, and the back of my head. If I had gone any harder, I would have landed directly on my head, and I probably wouldn't be here, at least not in control of my limbs. It was indeed a very violent, brutal fall, made worse by the fact that I landed in one of the old entertainment rings with very little give. And I think this is the match where they actually changed the mats around a bit, because they were the old, really hard mats. I think they changed them. The new entertainment rings obviously have some give to them, actually too much give for my taste, but the old rings were torturous in their stiffness, and guys were getting hurt too often and careers were ending early. As a concession, new rings were made, and yes, they did bounce, but to tell you the truth, the fans don't seem to care. What's also interesting, and one thing he mentions in the book, is that they wanted to put him back on the stretcher after he took the top of the bump from the top. Look at the crowd growing in anticipation as he drops thumbtacks on the mat, which I believe is the first time I had thumbtacks on the King of the Ring. In WWE. First time, if I'm not mistaken. Might have had it once or twice before, but certainly the first time where it was like, oh my God, they're going to go on the thumbtacks. And yes, it's a bump sadly I've taken far too many times in my backyard/basement wrestling federation I used to do back in my teen/early 20s days. But in any event, Foley actually talks about how he asked Mike Chioda, the referee, to help him up because he did not want to go on a stretcher twice in one night. He thought it would have made the character look completely weak and ridiculous. As Foley has him in the mandible claw here. So one thing, by the way, in looking back at the thumbtack spot that they talk about, and they've mentioned it on the Pritchard show, they also talk about it, Foley talks about it in his book as he's about to take the bump here. He says, my in-ring conversation with Mike Chioda was not the only one I failed to recollect. Now, he keeps talking about this conversation with, oh, okay, gotcha. So he keeps talking about the conversation with Mike Chioda. I'm assuming it's when Chioda came to help him up, but several days after the match, I asked The Undertaker if I had spoken to him afterwards. He laughed and recalled our discussion. Did I use the thumbtacks out there? Is apparently what I had come out with. He looked at me, still covered with the damn things, and said, yes, you did, Jack. Yes, you did. Oh, good, I reportedly said, and walked away. Now, Bruce Pritchard actually makes mention that Mick apologized to him for not getting the thumbtack spot in during the match. That's how knock-loopy this poor guy was. Also, by the way, now you can see the infamous, from the Don't Try This at Home ads, the infamous shot of Mick Foley with the tooth in his nose. Well, they always thought he was smiling. Apparently, he always tells the story if he wasn't smiling, because the tooth had been knocked through here. It's a fun visual for all of you. Through here, though, up into his nose, and he was taking his tongue out through the top and trying to see where it was. So this ends here, and he talks about Vince observed the whole process while a WWE cameraman caught the magic of the moment on film. Afterwards, Vince walked over to me in the dressing room. Mick, I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for this company. He had said sincerely, and I nodded blankly. He then said, but please promise me that I'll never see you do anything like this ever again. This always gets me because Mick did do this again just a little while later. As a matter of fact, if you look at the history of the Hell in a Cell, it very well might have been the next one, the one he did in his retirement match. Now, I know he obviously fell through the ring, and it was a give, and the ring gave. So when he came to the top of the cell, he went right through that centerpiece. And it was also his final bump that it was supposed to be at the time. Of course, it came back a month later. We all know that story. But at the time, I thought it was going to be his final bump. But it's just crazy that, like, they said, please don't do, we won't do stuff like this ever again. And then he had many, many more times. Rock at Rumble 99 with the 100 chair shots to the head. Many more times when that came out. And he continued to do that. So, Foley then talks, and I thought this was... This was something that was interesting. So he talks about, it was now an hour after the conclusion of the saga, and I had forgotten one very important detail, my post-match call to Colette. Even if I had remembered, it would have been impossible to call, because I had neglected to pay my phone bill, and our line had been disconnected. She had actually picked up the kids, who had cried themselves to sleep, and taken them to our gym to await some word on my condition. I was just about an hour to be taken to the hospital when Dave Hebner stopped me. Cactus, your wife has beat me, and I just got off the phone with her. She's very upset. She wants you to call her at the gym. I was not quite ready for our conversation. You can't do this to us, Mickey. She cried. And when I cried, and when I say she cried, I mean she cried. Your children love you, and you can't do this to them. I love you, and you can't do this to me. Please promise me that you won't do this anymore. I hadn't apologized so much since I took Nicole to Noel to the... So he basically talks about how from this match is how he transitions. And think about it. We're now 3 months away from him offering Vince McMahon a Slurpee as Vince McMahon is going to the back, and the debut of Mr. Sacco and all that really fun Mick Foley comedy stuff. This match is really the start of what transitioned Mankind and Mick Foley's character into more of a comedy type role. And some of those great entertaining moments. I think it really comes from maybe that conversation with his wife. I mean, then again, you do see in Beyond the Mat that his kids were there during, when he had the match with The Rock and everything. So, by the way, at this point, little kid me is sitting on the couch and he's trying to bargain with his parents. He thinks he's one match away from never being able to watch another show after flipping off an entire crew of guests at the party. And my big worry was, as you see Francois cheering on, Francois, the chiropractor, the trainer, cheering on Mick, giving him a standing O in the ring himself. Sub-Zero from the Mortal Kombat movie. So you actually hear the crowd. So unbelievable. But yeah, so as Mick Foley's being carried out, I was trying to make mention of the fact that, hey, this would be a lot of fun if we started to, we have to tune into Raw tomorrow night to get an update on Mick Foley's condition. We have to know what happens to Mick Foley. That was my big petition. But also at this moment here, a couple things happened in the post-match of this Hell in a Cell. Number one, the end of Mick Foley ever as a heel. I think it ended right here. Not only did Mick Foley, as the Mankind character, come off pretty cute in his helping of Kane and his handling of Kane. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch the Raw right before this Hell in a Cell. But his interaction with Kane, while Kane wanted nothing to do with him as a friend, was adorable. And it was cool to see. So I thought that was interesting. But it was really hard, in my opinion, to see Mick Foley as anything other than a babyface at this point. I know they tried. Technically, he tried to get back in Vince McMahon's good graces and, was the guy that it was clear Vince was using during the Survivor Series 1988 tournament. But I think this would be end of Mick Foley as any sort of heel. He was the beloved babyface from this point forward. Then, I think what it also did was, for me, it made Hell in a Cell something to look forward to. Excuse me. Only with the idea of, hey, well, we're going to watch this because someone's going to go off the top of the Hell in a Cell. And that wasn't fair when you see, and first off, they tried to do things that I felt like in retrospect were a little forced. I believe the Hell in a Cell after this was Cactus and Triple H. Could be wrong on that, but I think that was the one that was after this. And Cactus takes the bump off the top through the top of the Hell in a Cell, through the ring breaks, pedigree, end of Cactus Jack. Then you had the 6-man where Rikishi takes the bump off the top of the Hell in a Cell into like all that hay. And it was like, man, like that one seemed forced. Like it was weird, and why is there a big barrel of hay randomly there? But I think almost like at that point it made the Hell in a Cell something that was unfair to live up to. I remember Jericho and Triple H having a great Hell in a Cell match and hating every moment of it because no one went through the cell. It made the actual cell match, in my opinion, you didn't want to watch it because you just would be waiting for somebody to go through the cell. And, I mean, it's good on their point that I don't think they had anybody go off the top of the cell for many years after that because you couldn't have that. You couldn't do the match if that was going to be the way it was. But you go back and you watch some of those other Hell in a Cell matches like, Triple H and Jericho, Triple H and Batista, Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker. Those Hell in a Cell matches are great, and there is no bump off the top. But being 11, 12, 13 at the time, it's like that idea of, oh, we got to see the Hell in a Cell because they're going to go off the top. It's going to be sick. It's going to be nuts. And they had to change the way that they did it. And obviously, I'm glad they did. You don't want to see people take these bumps. Shane does the big jump off the top because he's a madman. But like, if Shane McMahon's in a Hell in a Cell and he doesn't go up to the top, I can tell you that at WrestleMania 32. Nobody gave a crap about that match. Like, the match itself people were into and people were super stoked for. I could tell you, though, that match, nobody was even really paying attention to the match itself. They were much more about Shane O'Mac going off the top of the Hell in a Cell. That was something that they were really into and they wanted to see. But the whole match leading up to that, people were zoned out because you're expecting that. And I think same when he was in the Hell in a Cell with, was it Kevin? I think it was with Kevin. People are expecting him to go off the top of the Hell in a Cell. He can't be in a Hell in a Cell match and knock off the top. And he does it, and more power to him. But that kills it now. And now, people kind of take away from some matches that, like little kid me did with Triple H and Jericho. I remember just sitting there mind-boggled. They go off the top and then go off the cell. I mean, what the hell was that? What a rip-off. Let's see if we can get our money back. Which, I mean, is very close-minded, at this point now. I'm 15, so blood-hungry son of a gun, teenager. But glad to see they kind of changed their mind with that because obviously, more power to Mick Foley. If you do see him, thank him. That's always usually what I say. And he never says, hey, kid, I don't know what you're talking about. He's aware of the sacrifice that he's made, and it's cool that it's great that he's able to still, he has his wits about him. I've read every one of his books. I just got done with Santa Mick over on my honeymoon, and I thought that was great. And, he's done really well. And that's great to see. And if you ever get a chance to go see him do spoken word or stand-up, go check it out because it's a lot of fun. So here comes Kane. At this point, Kane is like crazy monster Kane. He's unbeatable. He's destructive. It looks like just craziness. And I remember from when they did the Inferno match, they set Kane on fire. And if you go back and you watch that match, his arm gets set on fire. And he almost looks like on his arm itself, there's, for those of you guys watching live, I'm actually sitting here trying to show you guys on my arm. Ridiculous. But it almost looks like foil paper. And it looks like something you can kind of tell that it's some sort of material that is okay to be flammable, at least for a short period of time. So Kane comes out here, and nothing is exposed on him at all. And I don't think that's how he was always dressed at this point. But when he comes out dressed like this, I just remember thinking, they're going to set him on fire. And his entire body is going to flicker like that flash paper type stuff that was on his body at the Inferno. And we're going to see Kane run out of there, set on fire, which is crazy. Also, because of the time, they weren't even just saying that he was going to set himself on fire. They were saying that he was going to set himself on fire until he took his last breath. So they were basically saying Kane was going to die on television. Probably would have then showed up with like a Band-Aid the next night on Raw and killed that entire stip, but obviously didn't happen. The foam middle finger. Love it. What if you'd walk into a WWE show these days with a classic Stone Cold foam middle finger if they'd confiscate that? Probably. Now, Stone Cold's in bad shape here. You could tell, we mentioned earlier, he had the staph infection. His entire arm is wrapped up pretty bad here. Austin's running at Kane. Does press. And I will say the crowd is so hot. Like, think about the idea that they've just seen that Hell in a Cell, and the crowd is so hot for Austin. Like, as if literally nothing can slow them down. Crazy how, like, so many different people you had your fans who were your DX fans. You had your fans who were Headbanger fans. Everyone was an Austin fan. People were into The Undertaker. Your people were into The Rock. Excuse me, you had Ken Shamrock. You had Sable, who was, like, hotter than hot at this point. And there's just up and down the card, legitimate huge stars, which it's really cool. And by the way, right now, when you look up and down the roster on Raw and SmackDown, there is no reason they shouldn't have household name big top stars everywhere, because it's the most loaded roster you've ever seen. They just released, I think it's like a WWF sock line, I want to say it is, like your first line of WWE socks. And there's like 16 different people that are on those, maybe more than that. And there's a number of people still missing. That's how deep the roster is right now. So it should still be like that. For some reason, I feel like it's not, but it should be. It should definitely still be that way. Of course, there's also a different time period. Stone Cold really fits in with what was popular at the time, which was that, in your face kind of craziness, going at it, middle fingers everywhere, cursing was really big, middle fingers were really big, pushing the envelope was really big, and Austin he really fit in. Same as DX with the crotch chops, and what you'd soon see in WWE, and you had started to see this a bit, but it really amps up. I always feel like Fully Loaded 98 is the turning point for when the sex appeal of WWE really amps to another level with the handprints, which we'll review at some point during July. So, by the way, Kane and Mankind are still the number one contenders. They never did cash in on that tag title match. But what was strange about it was they were still building it. So eventually they do go for those tag titles. But what's really interesting is that despite being the number one contenders, and it was supposed to be on this show, they aren't there, and they were replaced by the Midnight Express, the new Midnight Express, and still don't quite get what happened there. But so despite some legitimate throwaway last-minute added-on matches, with all my squirming, can you tell I'm going to be getting a pillow for the back of this chair? Austin taking a nasty bump on the cell. They were in love with the Hell in a Cell structure here, by the way. This was like, on every Raw, they built the Hell in a Cell and put it up, leading up to this show. Hell in a Cell was like every single show they had the Hell in a Cell leading up to this show. And here it is again. Now, can you imagine, like, they just did all that stuff with the Hell in a Cell. Now they're bringing the Hell in a Cell down for this match, too. It's crazy. I'm nursing this beverage, by the way. I thought my wife was the nurse, but still having the one shandy for the entire 3-hour show. So now the cell is down. So of course, logic is like, oh damn, they're going to go up there too. May as well. He almost became too much cell at this point. It was overexposed. It was an overexposed cell. So that was something that I thought was weird here in this match. So the idea of the first blood match, of course, is that you get busted open, and that means you're done, right? You've lost your way, and you've lost your, you've lost the match, and clearly Austin would have lost the belt if he's busted open. So immediately it comes like, well, how are they going to do this? Because remember, the thought process going into this for most people is Kane's not winning the belt here. Kane's going to be set on fire. Don't know how they're going to do that. And how are they going to show that this man is bleeding when he's got a mask covering his face? And every other part of his body, for that matter. But instead, you're getting Austin thrown into, like, every single structure. And he's not bleeding. Despite the fact that, like, you have that classic shot of bloody as all hell Shawn Michaels going directly into the fencing. And he doesn't go in there. Now the cell is lifting with Kane on the full bearing of the cell, which is strange. The bottom pole. Kane, my wife's favorite wrestler, if he's in the mask. And if you're wondering what we're talking about with that, when we were online to meet Kane at Access this past, I guess it was last year, right? Because we missed out on this year's Mania. Had to go get married. But last year we were at Mania. And we were online to meet Kane. And Kane came out wearing a polo and no mask. And my wife was having none of it. And we left full on. My wife only wanted a picture of Kane in the Kane getup. As in the Demon King. This Kane she would have loved a picture with. There's a rather large man with a shirt off and a Burger King hat. The man, by the way, over here on the barricade, left side of it, the right side of it, is the guy who's been on the camera about 100 times in the front row by ringside. I'm not sure if he was moved or if he's just running around chasing the action, but he's a madman on this show. Your typical staple of your late 1990s WWE pay-per-view where they battle all around, they battle in the entranceway, bunch of moves, bunch of craziness, bunch of weapons, and the staple of many of these matches. Having some things pop up on the computer screen. I don't think it matters to you guys or you guys will be able to see that. If you watch the review of this video, though, if you watch this video later on, or maybe you pop it up on your mobile device, and if you're like me, take your phone and pop it on the side here. And while you watch, you'll be able to watch the show live with my face there and me and my kind of running commentary during the show. That's not a bad idea. It's what I did with the Pritchard show when they did and I didn't obviously have it in the face, but on Thanksgiving this past year. So yeah, big, huge suplex up on the ramp for no real reason. It's first blood match. They should be grabbing something and trying to jam it in the top of someone's head, but the battling around was something that they did a lot of back then. The problem with Kane, and it was something they had a problem with Undertaker back in the day too, is that he was presented as impervious to pain so much that it almost became like, now he's going toe-to-toe with Austin. It's almost like, well, how is Austin even going toe-to-toe with Kane? Like, Kane's destroyed everyone in his path and not act like anything's bothered him. Now he's in a match, and they're pretty much going 50-50. So it almost became, like, weird in a way. You'll see Vince McMahon over there with Sable. Still building that up. Really just a way to get Sable on the show. Kane, by the way, he's got that big hair. Almost looks like the kind of the fake Kane that showed up as this reveal from the May 19th deal. He's got the big puffy hair and crazy. Something's going to happen in this match, by the way, that I'm going to make very clear to you. I hate it. I will point it out exactly when it happens. But if you recall earlier, I was talking about how the big thought in my family was the excitement level over seeing Mick Foley the next night on Raw, right? Oh, crap, we need an update on Mick. Maybe let us go home, spend the night, and wonder, damn, I wonder what the hell Mick Foley's doing, right? That should be a selling point the next night on Raw. And I realize they're on the sellout streak, and they're not needing anything. That random show I went to with that piss poor lineup I went to earlier that I remember being so much better, sold out at Madison Square Garden. So they're doing just fine. But still, that was a big piece that I thought was a big selling point the next night on Raw. And they kill it. So you'll know the point that I can't stand. Austin taking the random little tiny fan, the desk fan, which I would be thrilled to have one of right now, on the never thought I'd be watching a wrestling show and going, ooh, that desk fan looks just friggin' fantastic. But it does, especially if you can tell how much I'm listening right now. But that desk fan, he takes the desk fan and hits Kane in the face with the desk fan. Love Earl Hebner here. He's so close to the wrestlers because he wants to see if anyone gets sliced open. I do love, by the way, and I know that part of it's a little silly that kind of takes away from the aura of the big guy that he goes up to the top. But I love that Kane does it because Undertaker always went up to the top too. I always thought that was really cool. So one thing I wanted to quickly mention, so I mentioned it on the Bruce Pritchard show. They talked about how in the middle of the Mick Foley match, and if you cut back to that clip of Vince, you'll notice Pat Patterson is not there. At least I don't think he was there. That in the middle of the Mick Foley match, Pat Patterson found out that his partner died. Partner for many years, Louis, had passed away. So think about how insane that is. That one of the top executives in the company, by all accounts, one of the most respected men in the business, basically Vince McMahon's right-hand man, had found out in the middle of this show that he was on earlier that his partner of many years had passed away. It's crazy to think. And something you just don't really hear too much about is an account of the show. Okay, so here comes Mick Foley. He literally looks like he's hurting, right? And his run-in is so unnecessary here. It's just, he looks like he is in fucking lots of pain. And you had a moment there. So take him off TV for a little while and build back up his return. He could have came back out like the biggest babyface of all time. And I realize he's intertwined in the main storyline and he was a heel. They still wanted to keep him as a heel coming out of this, which was pretty much impossible. Here comes Undertaker. By the way, Undertaker's going through his period of time where he's wearing sweats. The guy is also clearly struggling. His ankle's in bad shape, but he's also wearing sweats. There are many times on the show where Undertaker comes on to the show many a times in a complete sweatsuit, sweatpants, sweatshirt, looking ridiculous. Not like the dead man you ever remember. So it's very weird. Bizarre to see. I noticed it while watching some of these shows when he's doing his gimmick where he's interrupting all the matches and destroying everyone trying to get what he wants. And he comes out wearing his sweatshirt and sweatpants and just doesn't look at all like The Undertaker. It doesn't. It's nothing special about him. It's just he looks like a middle-aged, weird, out-of-shape man. Bizarre, considering he wrestled for like another 20 years. So Undertaker now attempts to wake Hebner up, it looks like, by pouring a gasoline all over him. But the problem is now Austin is bleeding, and I just remember being like, come on, Austin, separate out Kane. My father, who despised non-finishes, was already thinking, God, they're going to have both men bleed. We're going to have no clear winner, and they're not going to set Kane on fire, but Austin's going to keep the belt. What bullshit? Why did we even, my father hated main events that ended with a non-finish. And we'll get into that many more shows down the road. So Austin hits him with the chair, but Hebner's coming too, and notices, oh, wait. Kane's your new champ. And crazy, because Austin was the dude at the time, and they took the belt off him, and they gave the newcomer Kane the world title match. Paul Bear's beside himself. Austin's angry. Crowd is like, what the hell? And immediately, forget about the moment they just killed with Mick Foley. We got to tune into Raw tomorrow night. Because what in the actual fuck? Stone Cold has lost the title. And Vince McMahon's really stoked. Got to be tough for Vince too, right? You assume Vince knows, and they're off. And that's it. That's the King of the Ring. They went off the air. Vince McMahon, roll it, saying damn. And that was that, man. Wow. So that was the King of the Ring, 1998. Thank you so much for the guys who did tune in. I did see some people filtering in and out. Appreciate that. If you guys watch this on delay, though, you certainly can right here on YouTube.com. That's your best way to do it. If you guys are on mobile, there's a way to there's an application you can download where you'd be able to kind of stream it in the background while you do other stuff and keep it still going. So look into that. I will post it on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at TommyOnTheSpot, and I'll continue to post updates about the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast. And I'll update the Watchalong Wrestling Twitter. You can also follow Watchalong Wrestling Podcast on @WatchWrestlePod, though it is very basic right now. And of course, everything will also be on the DailySpotlight.com. Make sure you check that out. That is our home base. It's a website that I use for everything. All the YouTubes go through there. And there's going to be a lot of fun stuff coming up down the pipeline. Happy 4th of July for all of you guys there. Happy birthday to the United States of America. Happy Independence Day. And if you are like me and you're getting ready for a night with friends and family, just be safe. Have a good time with it. And if you're prepared to get up and maybe watch a little hot dog eating contest, that's usually what the 4th of July is all about. But 25 years ago, that is not what the 4th of July was about for wrestling fans. Because 25 years ago, live on the USS Intrepid, Lex Luger body slammed Yokozuna. It was the Stars and Stripes challenge to see who could body slam the massive WWF World Champion Yokozuna. And who was in the crowd? But a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, Tommy on the Spot. And you will hear about that all next week, right here on the Watchalong Wrestling Podcast as we watch SummerSlam 1993 on our usual day and time, Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock p.m. That's right, I am not going to make you guys stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning again. So it's going to be Wednesday nights every Wednesday at 9 o'clock p.m. Next week, SummerSlam 1993, and there will be a live recollection of what it was like to be there in the crowd as a young kid watching Yokozuna and the stars of the NFL, the NBA, and World Wrestling Entertainment try to body slam the massive Yokozuna. So we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. The rise of Lex Luger and Lex Express and everything that came along with that. What it was like to be a Hulkamaniac who now had to accept a new hero. and we'll talk about all of that. But fun to watch the King of the Ring 1998 with everybody. And if you're wondering what happened with Kane's reign as world champ, he would actually lose the title the next night to Stone Cold in one of the best matches in the history of Raw. So get a little extra time, go check that out. Highest rated match by Dave Meltzer on the show, 4.5 stars for the Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Mankind. So great to relive all of that, and great to watch Hell in a Cell in real time. That was fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and thank you so much for staying up late with me tonight. And remember, you can watch this podcast anytime, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you'll get all of the weekly news. We're going to be up with a lot more wrestling drives about the current product and talking all about that. If you want to leave feedback to the show, that's right, feedback. I almost got out of here without feedback. You can send an email. Yeah, you can obviously send it over to Twitter to hit me up on at Tommy on the Spot, or you can send an email over to watchalongwrestling@gmail.com. Simple. Boom. Watchalongwrestling, gmail.com. WATCHALONG @gmail.com. Wrestling@gmail.com. So watchalongwrestling@gmail.com. If you have any questions at all, any feedback on today's show, I will read your feedback next week. And you know, the live chat was going, and see a couple folks jumped in and out of that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we will see you guys again next week. And be sure to follow us on Twitter. Updates on where this will be available and where you can get it in terms of where podcasts can be found. So until next time, everybody, this has been Tommy on the Spot. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll see you next week. Happy 4th of July. Take care. Be safe. Be well.